Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 141 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. And Matt, I just told you before the show that I'm kind of sick today. I got a cold. I got an eye infection. I am, for the second time this year, I have an eye infection. I am going to be reading my notes, squinting like Gilbert Gottfried for this episode. But for some reason, that was the smoothest intro I've ever done. Maybe I'm one of these people that works better hurt. That is definitely not true. That is absolutely not true. But you know what? Maybe this episode will be the final proof of that. But speaking of final, Matt, you just informed us this will be our final episode on Skype, which is depressing to me as a person that hates change of any kind.
Well, so there's a lot for me to address right there, Trevor. First of all, I want everyone to know that I am not somebody that drives my employees into the ground. Did you know that I am the CEO of ThROH The Years, and I paid Trevor a measly wage? Did you all know that? Because it's true. No, it's not.
I'm counting on that pension plan one day. I have no fallback. So I hope this is all true.
You've been telling me for years. 8 cents a year. Which is, it's a high percentage of your usual 10 cents a year. How many people get a 80% pension, Trevor? I don't know. But, yeah, so I just want to let everybody know I did offer Trevor to postpone this recording despite his, because of his being ill with a super virus of honor. And he turned me down. I guess he... The super virus supercharges him. But yeah, no,
I just got to say that's not true. Matt is the Fritz von Erika podcast. He told me that if listeners' numbers ever go down, he's going to fake a heart attack during an episode. So just be on the lookout for that.
And these episodes are pre-recorded. So, I mean, who's going to upload it? Who's going to upload it if I have a heart attack? We'll have to see. Certainly not Trevor. He doesn't do it. He does all the research and does the hard work, and I do the real easy thing where I upload the podcast. Yes, but Trevor, I told you before, if you need to bow out, I'm happy to oblige. So but thank you for joining us. I know this is important work for the people, for all the deep vein thrombosos out there. Trevor, you don't have deep vein thrombosis, do you?
No, a major NBA superstar had that recently, and we got multiple tweets telling us. I like that we are now synonymous with a uncomfortable medical condition.
I mean, it can be very dangerous. Like, we're probably really not cool that we make light of this, but it's too late now. We're both going to hell, so it is what it is. Speaking of going to hell, Skype can go right down. No, just kidding. We are probably just the only two weirdos left that are still using it to do our podcast. So serves us right, Trevor, for not getting with the times. Serves us right.
Yeah, I know we'll have to switch to Zoom. I know everyone does use Zoom because I've been on a number of podcasts as a guest where they've used Zoom. But I don't know, maybe it is because that is something maybe people should know about me is I hate change of any kind more and more as I get older, which I actually realize is a problem I need to probably address.
Trevor is a Luddite.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I never loved Skype, but you know what? You tell me I can't have it anymore. Now I have had every episode we've ever recorded of this has been on Skype. I have had human relationships where I've talked to people on Skype. I should probably find a way to save those messages just in case. Like it's just
human relations on Skype, Trevor.
I might have had Matt. There are ways people can have sex on the internet. No,
all right, thanks for telling me.
Let me show you later. No, but yeah, we are going to a bad place. And speaking to bad places, Matt, you were on the 5-star match game since the last episode. Joe Gagney's great little game show podcast. And without giving anything away, I think fans of Matt Feuerstein should listen to that episode because you were delightful. And
so no one should listen to that episode. Is that what you're trying to say, Trevor?
Oh, how dare you, sir? How dare you? No, that was all about AEW, and Matt, as always, is like one of the real superstars of trivia games. He is just charming and always always good at them. So I haven't heard. I'm not saying you've won every episode. I have never heard you on an episode that I have both co-guested on or that I've listened to as a listener and felt like I don't know if you've ever finished last. You probably have, but like people that have listened to me on wrestling on the 5-Star Match Game can come up with multiple examples of coming away saying, boy, someone did not do good on that show. And I don't know if I've ever listened to a wrestling podcast where of all the wrestling game show podcasts, I don't think I've ever come away saying Matt Feuerstein did not do good on that show.
Well, first, thank you. But I think most of you listeners, you could probably agree, there's probably nothing more awkward than being on a podcast and listening to somebody praise you. So while it is very nice of you, Trevor, I am extremely uncomfortable.
Okay, well, let's move on then, like most men should do, to ignore our feelings and talk about sports, or in this case, fake sports, because we've got a big show to cover today. Supercard of Honor 2 took place March 31st, 2007 at the Michigan State Fairgrounds and Expo Center in Detroit, Michigan, in front of a reported crowd of 1,200 fans. In maybe the most important note we will read today, Figure 4 Weekly at the time reported that Hornswoggle was at the show. So very important.
He was under the ring, right? Is it?
Just in case they needed him.
No, isn't that part of the lore? Isn't that where he lives?
I think so. There's a lot of lore about Hornswoggle in the WWE's, some of it which does not age well. But
I mean, it was offensive at the time, I would say even.
We opened the show how we closed the last show with which, even though we're supposed to be done with the 5th year festival cliffhangers, we didn't quite get a cliffhanger, but we got probably 2 promos recorded at the exact same time. With Jimmy Jacobs backstage, he says, well, he and BJ Whitmer hate each other. There's a fundamental difference between them. Jimmy says BJ fights for acceptance from the fans, to have a legacy, to be the messiah of Ring of Honor. Jimmy says Jimmy says BJ's fueled by pride and hubris. Jimmy says, meanwhile, he's fueled by the greatest cause of all. Socrates studied it. Shakespeare wrote songs and plays about it. Tonight, Jimmy fights for it. Jimmy says he and BJ's war is similar to the war of the fallen angel. And then he says Lucifer, but he pronounces it Lucy-4. And I
think he was trying to I don't know, make it sound more grand, maybe? I don't know.
He says, since Lucy-4 declared war on God and the archangels.
So I think actually, not to interrupt, yes to interrupt. He was referring to 2 Ring of Honor stars there, because he was talking about Christopher Daniels, and he was talking about the person that Christopher Daniels' prophecy took out, Lucifer.
Exactly. Rest in peace, Daphne. But yeah, so he says this uprising between Lucifer and God and the archangels, the uprising was started on the basis of pride, but at the end of the day, love conquered all. Jimmy says BJ talks about his legacy, but too few years from now, he and BJ will be in the exact same place, 6 feet under, their bodies decomposing, being eaten by beetles and maggots. For some reason, the fact that he threw in beetles in there made me laugh. And
Just imagine Paul McCartney noshing on some BJ Whitmer.
And I mean, a piece of George Harrison's toast recently sold for a lot of money. So this is what we'd call a reverse Harrison, where where the Beatles eat you, not what the Beatles eat. But then he goes, what then of BJ's legacy? Sure, the fans will remember him, but then those fans will die and their memories will die with them. Jimmy fights for one thing that's been around since the start of humanity and will be until the end. He fights for love tonight. Jimmy throws a chair then in anger and says he fights for this tonight. And he points over off screen. The camera pans over and we see that Lacey has been standing there the whole time. She's in a fancy little slinky dress like you might wear for prom night. Jimmy holds her hand and says he fights to reclaim his innocence and purity. Jimmy has gone to a lot of fights as the underdog, but tonight he has love, immortality, invincibility, and eternity in his corner. So in his mind, he's not the underdog. BJ's already lost, big brother. Jimmy says he has the chance to reclaim Lacey, and Lacey tells him that tonight could be that night. So, Matt, I saw the last show on that promo that ended the DVD. We talked about that promo. I saw some people online really praised it. I think we both agreed, but that was a promo where it was like Jimmy's parts of it were really good, and parts of it was maybe Jimmy biting a little off more off than he could chew. I felt like this promo was a lot more, mostly Jimmy biting off more than he could do, being very overly dramatic and trying to be very flowery and grand, which maybe again is the point, that Jimmy feels over the top emotions like this, but I was cringing, and not necessarily in the good way.
I think I like this promo more than you because I think the one thing I didn't like about the last promo was like the crying. And like he didn't do that this time. I think his emotional range, I think, was a little bit more calibrated in this promo. But I would think what almost ruined the promo for me was the stupid like stereotypical like sexualizing of Lacey they did, where he's like, "I fight for love," and then they immediately like pan to Lacey's legs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's just like they could have just like panned over to her, like like that. It just felt so like 1996 ECW, like just like killed the mood of like the emotion of the promo and made it a joke. That was what hurt the promo for me. I think that was just a poor editorial choice.
Yeah, I mean that's like they've been doing with her probably since she started in Ring of Honor, starting
Yeah.
with the pan up the legs. But
Well,
yeah,
well,
I
that's
agree.
what
If there was
that's what they
any
did.
time.
That's what they did for all the women. And that's because Gabe came from ECW. But like in this particular situation, especially, that I think was not the right choice.
Yeah. We then get a video package telling us that 1 year ago to the day at the last Supercard of Honor, Dragon Gate put on the match of the year, and now they are back for the rematch. Then we get something we do not see on the DVD, but we have to inform you, Matt, and the fans. We have to tell you that there was a dark match, a four-corner survival match. Bobby Dempsey defeated Alex Payne, Dingo, and Rhett Titus. So your classic ROH students dark match plus Dingo.
So not the Ultimate Warrior, to be clear.
No, this was not the Dingo Warrior. This is just the Dingo. This guy's a little bit more sedate. But we then go to the ring as Bobby Cruz introduces Jay Briscoe. Jay gets a nice reaction. He grabs the mic. He says his brother is the most unluckiest sumbitch in the whole world. Again, that's his phrasing, not mine. Jay can get away with it. I can't. Jay can guarantee us there is nothing more Mark would rather do tonight than be in this ring and bust his ass for all of us. But instead, he's laid up tonight in a hospital bed. Jay promises us that Mark will be back. The Briscoes are the tag team champions, and Mark will be just as crazy as he's ever been. At this point, Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal make their way to the ring. Daniels looks for a second mic that is usually there. I think Ring of Honor usually brings two mics to a lot of these shows. In this case, he is informed that a second mic is not there. If you listen closely, you can hear him say, "Unfucking believable," and he grabs Jay's mic. The crowd chants "Fallen Angel," but Daniels tells them he knows who he is, so shut the hell up because he's got something to say. Daniels says Jay comes out here with a sad story about his brother falling on that melon head of his, and Chris could care less. The only thing that matters to him and Matt Sydal is the Briscoes are the tag team champions of the world, which means the scheduled match they had already signed against them for tonight is going to be their tag title rematch. Daniels tells Jay to get his crippled brother out here now so that they can do this right now. Jay says again, hey, Mark's in the hospital. Like Jay Briscoe at this point, taking that pretty well, I would say, for the Jay Briscoe characters. He's just like, look, Mark's in the hospital right now. I don't know what to say. Daniels tells him to shut up, snatches the mic back from him, saying that the best thing for Ring of Honor right now would be for ROH to strip the tag titles from these two accident-prone bastards and give them to him and Sydal. The crowd boos, and Jay calls Daniels old man. Now he's getting mad, saying they aren't forfeiting a damn thing. This is the point in any one of these promos where Daniels is called an old man, where I inform you that at this point in Christopher Daniels' career, he was 37 years old.
Which probably to some of our listeners, that does sound like an old man.
Every day gets faster, folks. Every day gets faster. But Jay says he does have a partner, and if Daniels and Sydal can beat them tonight, maybe down the line they'll get a rematch for the tag titles. Daniels says that's fine for him. That's fine to him. And out comes Delirious. Delirious gets on the mic. He cuts a promo in delirious ease, but we can make out that he says that they're going to do this for Mark Briscoe, and he ends by saying "man up." And that brings us to our official opener of the DVD. Delirious and Jay Briscoe defeat Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal in 18 minutes, 7 seconds. seconds when Delirious pins Seidel after hitting the chemical imbalance too. Matt, what did you think about this as a way to start the show?
Well, I mean, I think that the Briscoes against Seidel and Daniels was meant to be one of like the real highlights of the show. Probably they were planning on having a big deal, like great match. And this makeshift match wasn't gonna be that, I don't think. I will say this: this is a trend the whole night, but the crowd was very hot for all this, and I think. Let me know if you agree with me, Trevor. This might be one of the all-time hottest ROH crowds in terms of like loudness and enthusiasm. Did that come across to you on the show?
Yeah, this is obviously, like I was saying on the last show, it's a bit of a different sound than some shows when you have like 1,200 people. But yeah, I think they were consistently loud all night. And also, when we'll get to later, like at the end of the show, they had reasons to be burnt out and they were still up even then. Where I think some other crowds we even might have heard in the past were like, they're a loud crowd, but maybe they get a little worn out. This crowd stayed with it, right? Like,
Yeah, and like I mean, and it's not just like they were consistently loud, but like the pops were so loud. Like, and I don't think anything in this match got to that level, but we'll talk about a few things later in the night. But yeah, I mean, I think the big difference between this match and other matches we've seen with Daniels and Seidel is that they were doing a pure we're a heel tag team now. And previously it had been like Daniels looking over bemused at Seidel, who was being arrogant. Now Daniels is full heel and Seidel is a heel, so they were both just heels. And I guess their strategy was that they were going to wrestle in a very basic way to scale back the excitement, I guess, to get over his heels. And so I thought that the body of this match was pretty basic, and they, just kind of slow with Daniels and Seidel working over Delirious for a while, and then working over Jay for a while, and then it comes up into basically into the hot finishing sequence where Delirious gets a hot tag, hits a panic attack on Daniels, hits Shadows over Hell. Seidel makes the save. Seidel hits the Here It Is driver. Delirious locks in a Cobra Clutch. Seidel breaks out after a sequence, and Delirious goes for a Bizarro driver, but Seidel sweeps his legs, hits a standing moonsault. Delirious comes back with a Bizarro driver, but Daniels saves that and knocks Jay to the floor. And then Jay and Daniels end up in a forearm battle in a mid-ring brawl. Daniels pokes Jay in the eyes, sets Jay up for a superplex, but Jay hits a super gourd buster off the middle rope. Jay goes for the Jay Driller on Daniels, and Seidel hits an Enziguri, and Daniels hits an STO on Jay, and then Daniels hits the Angel's Wings, but Delirious comes in with a punt. So Seidel goes for a shooting star press, but Delirious moves. Seidel lands on his feet, and Delirious just very suddenly hits the chemical imbalance too, and gets, I'd say, the win felt very out of nowhere to me. But but before that sequence that I just described, it was just a very fairly basic, competent tag match. So I would say, a few exciting spots in that sequence I just mentioned, but like nothing special based on the recent tag matches we've seen. So I would describe this as a good match. I would not describe it as a very good match. I'd say it was on the disappointing end.
I think I like this match a little more than you, although I would also describe it just as good. I would, if I had to give it a star rating to like narrow my thoughts down more, I'd be like 3.25, maybe 3.5. But I didn't know. I don't know if I felt it was quite as basic as you, but I thought it was a very boilerplate 2007 ROH tag match. Like I thought there was a good. I enjoyed the action throughout, but I also thought there weren't real surprises in this match. Obviously, like you mentioned, I think the biggest, most notable thing about this match was Daniels now just completely healing it up quite a bit and joining Seidel in that kind of heel act. And it is interesting that for a few shows they were setting up the story where in backstage promos, Seidel was being very cocky, teasing a heel turn, and Daniels and Allison Danger were very befuddled with it, suggesting that they weren't really on the going along with it. They didn't really enjoy that Seidel was getting that way. And now this weekend, Daniels is actually now, I would say, the more heelish of the two, and almost like Seidel's almost like going along with his stuff. We've recently talked about how at this point Ring of Honor was winding down with Daniels even before the upcoming exodus of other TNA talent. There was already reports that Daniels was going to be winding down because apparently RH decided that his fee was too much for them or not worth it at this point. And so it does definitely seem like there became a switch, like from some point of the original ROH plan where they were maybe teasing something to, let's just have Daniels go real heel on the way out. And I thought he was a fun heel here, like lots of crowd interaction from him. He runs the ropes at one point and just does a cover instead of doing any move just to disappoint the fans. There's some simple cheating for him and Seidel, which I thought was fun stuff. I thought Lenny Leonard did a nice bit on commentary where he basically says, that winning the tag titles turned Seidel into a cocky jerk and that losing them must have done something to Daniels. I thought that was an interesting way to kind of frame how they both kind of turned heel during this run. And I also thought this match was kind of continuing one of the trends we saw from 2006 ROH, which was singles Christopher Daniels in this promotion in this era was kind of boring. And in tags and multi-mans, I thought he was still putting in pretty good performances. And I'd say the other noteworthy thing, I guess, is before the match, Jay said if Daniels and Seidel won tonight, they get a tag title shot, and then Daniels and Seidel lose. Now, maybe in modern AEW, where they do tons of eliminator matches where the eliminator gets eliminated, that wouldn't be noteworthy. But in this era of wrestling, I was kind of primed from like the way wrestling was running this time that like when a wrestler's in a non-title match where if the challenger beats the champ in a non-title match, they get a title shot. That almost always meant the champ was about to lose, and they don't do that here. And obviously, this was originally, like you mentioned, this was originally scheduled to be Briscoes versus Daniels and Seidel for the tag titles. And obviously, I'm sure the Briscoes were supposed to win that match. And so I would guess since Daniels had so few shows left, that also limits how many chances they would have to book this match again down the line. So they just decide, hey, how about we add a stip to still give this match some kind of stakes, but also we don't have time to run this match back again. So Daniels and Seidel never get their tag title rematch, which is kind of rare for Ring of Honor in this era where the tag division was so thin that usually they would every tag team would get rematches after a loss because gotta stretch that division out. In terms of other notable things here, Daniels and Seidel did this cool total elimination STO. I thought that was neat. And the last thing, I don't know if you noticed this, Matt. Jay does this big flip dive over the top rope to the floor, and he's done that spot before, and it's a cool spot, but like in the realm of 2007 indie wrestling, it's nothing too insane. And yet I always pop for when he does it way bigger than I think I'm going to. And I think it's because he's in a tag team with Mark Briscoe, who's known more as the crazy high flyer. And it always surprises me when Jay does a big dive, even though he does a share of them. Like he regularly breaks out the frog splash. He does a top rope leg drop. But for some reason, whenever he goes flying, I'm like, ooh, Jay Briscoe is high flying. And then I have to remember, say, well, he high flies a lot, Trevor. But for some reason, it always seems a little extra to me. It's just, it's just for some reason, just hang out with Mark. It makes everything you do seem a little, you don't expect as much. But
yeah, well, he's also a big guy, and he hit his somersault dive is pretty cool looking. Like it's pretty graceful, I would say,
yeah.
But also seems very impactful.
And Dave on the Observer from his, he didn't watch this DVD, but he had the live notes and that he was relaying, and he or someone who gave him notes must have gotten a bit mixed up, because Dave wrote in the Observer at the time that this match was a weird mix as Delirious was total babyface, but Daniels was doing his heel gimmick from TNA, said to be an excellent opener. I don't know how Delirious being a face and Daniels being a heel is a weird mix. They were on opposite teams. Like, did Dave for a second think they were on the same team? Because
maybe he might have just been a typo and he meant Seidel, and the person just got it wrong because Seidel obviously was not a total babyface. So that seems more likely to me than.
But even then, Seidel's been heel lately. So
well, right. What I'm saying, the person just messed up like that. Like they just misunderstood what was happening. Because it could be that the person who sent in the report was not following ROH.
Yeah. We then go to BJ Whitmer backstage being shot in what appears to be the same location Jacob shot his earlier promo in, but the lighting and camera angle are strangely unflattering for Whitmer here. It is just does not look great here. BJ says this all started 2 years ago when the ROH office gave him the choice to pick a new partner to go after the ROH tag titles, and he picked Jimmy because he saw a lot of potential and untapped toughness there. BJ says things have gone too far because now Jimmy realizes how tough he really is. BJ feels like he's created a monster, like he's Dr. Frankenstein, and things are out of his control. BJ says tonight he takes Jimmy out not because he wants to, but because he has to. So
this one was a much more of a boilerplate promo, I would say. But he tried.
That brings us to their second match. Claudio Castagnoli defeated Yamato via pinfall in 6 minutes, 55 seconds after hitting the Les Artes lift, which is a gut wrench into a pile driver. This was its Ring of Honor debut. I don't know if he had done it somewhere else other than Ring of Honor, but certainly in Ring of Honor, it's the move's debut. In fact, Dave Prazak even teases it before we see it in the match that it's a new move Claudio's been developing. So yeah, in case you missed the previous episode, Yamato was in his first year in the business here, and so this match follows a pretty predictable rookie versus veteran structure. Claudio dominates it, but lets Yamato kick out of a few things and lets him hit a few moves down the stretch. But what really stood out to me was Yamato, for a guy in his first year, he really showed a lot of charisma here. Even before the match, he's saying too tall to the fans of the crowd, like referencing Claudio. When Claudio taunts him with a test of strength, Yamato actually steps onto the first turnbuckle to respond, and they do the test of strength from there. Although even then, Yamato is a little bit shorter than Claudio. But Yamato is really good at emoting here and reacting to things in the moment. Like I found there was a noticeable charisma for him for a guy who was less than a year of doing this. Claudio, meanwhile, I said on the night before, it seemed like he toned down his heel stuff a little bit on that show. On this show, he abandons the heel stuff. Before the match even starts, he's prompting the crowd to do the hate chants that he hated them doing all during his heel run. After the match, Claudio even goes out of his way to shake Yamato's hand. So it feels like we'll see if this continues on the next double shot, but at least on this double shot, he just completely gave up on the heel stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask if this is like his official face turn because he started telling the crowd to say hey again.
Yeah, I don't remember if this is just a weekend thing or if it continues. I did like that the announcers talked about how it was a curious choice for ROH to choose Claudio to represent the promotion in the big ROH versus Dragon Gate tag match the night before. They talked about how, he had previously turned against ROH in the CZW feud in 2006. But then the announcers say it was ROH offering him an olive branch, and they put over how well he performed. And I like that the announcers, that they took the time to acknowledge that. It wasn't just, oh, he's a face now, let's forget the history. They at least pointed out how it was slightly weird and tried to justify it. Whether that justification is enough, that's another story. But I thought the Les Artes lift looked pretty good. But overall, perfectly decent filler match on the undercard, I would say.
Yeah, I just generally like Claudio better as a babyface. Like, he was just, all the stalling and stuff, it just didn't suit him. Now, like I said, I've said this before, he's great as a heel in modern times. But back then, I think he just hadn't figured it out yet. Whereas a babyface, he gets to show off his athleticism, his charisma. I just think he's just so much more watchable in this era, in this version of him. So we got to do a lot of cool stuff. Like you said, Yamato brought some charisma. But I really think that Claudio was just very entertaining here. And the Les Artes lift does look devastating. I guess he doesn't really stick with that for very long. I don't remember him using that very much. But but it was cool here, and like you said, decent filler, fair, perfectly entertaining. Certainly wasn't trying to do much more than that. But I was happy to see this version of Claudio back. So that's my takeaway from that match.
We then get our first video highlight of the night, going over Whitmer and Jacobs' history. This one showing them celebrating winning the tag titles at the Best of the American Super Junior show back in 2005. So yeah, to show, how much they're really spotlighting that feud on this show, we get video highlights of that feud throughout the entire night.
But I have some criticisms about how they do this, but we'll get to that later.
Ooh, I am interested in this, but we then get a do-or-die match. Eric Stevens defeats Mitch Franklin via pinfall in 40 seconds after hitting the Dr. Bomb. So again, like the night before, this was Eric Stevens' first weekend in ROH, and so for the second straight night, he squashes an ROH student. He goes for the same pop-up he started the match the night before with, but this time this student counters it. The student, Mitch Franklin, lands a few strikes. Stevens ends up only needing 2 moves to win the match, though. He hits a TKO, and then he hits the Doctor Bomb like he did the night before. This was just a squash, right, Matt?
No. No, I'm just kidding. Of course. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, Mitch, like the only difference is that Mitch got in a couple of shots this time, whereas in the night before, Alex Payne didn't. That's it. Only difference.
Yeah, and okay, let's see. I shouldn't have scrolled through my notes because now I have lost my place,
Well,
Matt.
I know that Larry Sweeney comes out next, and he calls the fans
Yes.
he calls the fans ham and eggers, and says that he and Hero have been hanging out with Hollywood A-listers like Corey Feldman and Scott Baio and Pauly
Yeah.
Shore. The three members of Trump's cabinet currently.
Oh God.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
I do want to just say I did appreciate that. Larry Sweeney does mention that Pauly Shore was the weasel, and 2, that I know I don't do that that well, but that's fine. And also good note that as of this recording, all 3 of those guys still alive. I actually think that Baio may be the Attorney General at this point because Trump confused him with his TV character Bob Blah Blah.
Gotta love a podcast that gives you a blah 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 reference. But
actually, when Scott Baio spoke at the 2016 Republican National Convention, I posted. I said, "Tonight at the RMC, Bob Blah Blah lauds Don and lobs bombs at Dem Nom."
So we get our second video highlight of Whitmer and Jacobs' history. Whitmer attacking Jacobs at the Dissension show. I imagine this is not the one you had a bone to pick with, so we will continue. And
it's not any particular one. It's something that I'll mention at the end of all those.
Okay. And now, Matt, as Matt gave a great preview of, we're back in front of the crowd. Larry Sweeney comes out and indeed tells us that we are ham and eggers, tells us to listen up because he's got something to say. Larry talks about the last couple of months he and Chris Hero have been hanging out with all the A-list Hollywood celebrities, guys like Corey Feldman, Scott Baio, and Scott knows it's not Charles who's in charge anymore, it's Chris Hero. Larry says they've been hanging out with the icon. I love that he called Pauly Shore. He goes, the icon, Pauly Shore. And then, like you said, he goes, we've been hanging with the weasel, buddy.
Yeah, you do that one. You do that way better than I do.
For some reason, it was extra funny because Larry Sweeney seems like such a throwback. Like he's like, people always said this, like his character felt like he was authentically 80s, like he was 20 years too late.
It was just the way he moves, like his mannerisms. I don't know how he did it, but it was pretty impressive.
So there's something funny about him also throwing in a Pauly Shore reference, like a very 90s guy. Like, we've been hanging with the weasel. Like, it's hard for me to imagine the Larry Sweeney character watching Encino Man for some reason, but it must have happened.
What about Jury Duty?
So, Jury Duty woefully under. Actually, no, I don't think any. You know what the sad thing is? Like, I was definitely a kid into Polymania because I definitely remember this was a household that watched not just Encino Man, not just Jury Duty, but even In the Army Now and Biodome.
Oh yeah, I think I saw Jury Duty and In the Army Now. I'm pretty sure I saw both of them in the theater. Pretty sure.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that I was that much of a Shore sicko, but he goes, this past week, Hero and me, we've been having such a good time with one particular individual. In fact, this individual, he told us he had to come to the show tonight. And so Larry introduces Hero and introduces reality TV star Jonny Fairplay. So I always try and, when I do this podcast, think of, I know we have a few listeners in their early 20s who did not grow up with this stuff. And I like to hope that one day when we are being eaten by beetles and maggots that people will still be listening to the show. Probably not, but there'll always probably be a stray listener. So I like to sometimes future-proof it. And I just thought, for those of you blissfully too young to remember who Jonny Fairplay was, who the fuck was Jonny Fairplay? And I actually had to think for a second, and I did a little bit of research just to refresh my memory. So Jonny Fairplay became famous as one of the most memorable contestants on the reality show Survivor due to the fact that he pretended that his grandmother died during the season to gain sympathy, and was also just very hateable in general, apparently. I only watched the first couple seasons of Survivor before I tuned out, but I remember hearing about Jonny Fairplay.
Nobody acted so sympathetic to me when my grandmother died. I don't feel like that works too well. Unless like his grandmother I don't know. Listen, I respect and love all your grandmothers. I'm sorry if anyone was offended by what I just said.
But it's funny. I've been looking up when I was looking up the Jonny Fairplay stuff. It's funny. I saw some people talking about this on Survivor forums and stuff, and people seem to agree that when Jonny Fairplay pretended his grandma died in that early days of Survivor, that was considered a horrific thing. And they said apparently Survivor has evolved to the point where that would just be par for the course.
That sounds like literally everything in the world, right?
Yeah. So apparently, as times have changed, that is more normal. But back then, I will assure you, apparently it was a big bad deal. But so before all of that, though, before the Survivor thing, which is how he made his fame, he worked. I just want to say this. So basically, we were kind of in the latter year or two of. After the Survivor thing happened, I think a few years before this, he basically parlayed that into a few years of basically being a reality TV villain for hire and kind of being famous just for being Jonny Fairplay. But before all of that, he actually worked in indie wrestling. Before Survivor, for all of that, he was on commentary. He did some work promoting all of that. He had done some work in TNA a couple of years before this, based off the fame he had gotten from Survivor. He was also, Matt, once Roddy Piper's personal assistant. In researching this, I was reminded that Roddy has claimed that Fairplay stole money from him, put them into an auto accident that physically injured Roddy to the point that Roddy almost died. And Roddy has gone on record at in interviews while he was alive, saying that he wished that Fairplay was dead and would like to have personally have killed him himself.
This is a lot.
Of course, that's Roddy Piper, who was also one of the big take what this guy says with a grain of salt people in wrestling. So pick your poison there. I will say, Matt, the funny thing is, despite all of this, the cherry on top is that Jonny Fairplay named his first daughter Piper. So back to the show. There's your Jonny Fairplay recap. Hero and Fairplay come out, and pretty much immediately Jonny gets a "fuck you, Fairplay" chant. Fairplay milks it for all it's worth, and soon as he starts talking, gets a "shut the fuck up" chant, which Sweeney does not enjoy. He goes, "I demand silence," calling him an A-list Hollywood celebrity. We then get a loud "you're not famous" chant. Jonny says his grandma says that he's famous, so he's pretty famous. So again, Jonny Fairplay, very grandma-coded wrestler. He says
the Larry Johnson of wrestling personalities.
He says,
do you get that reference, Trevor? I want to make sure. I know you laughed, but I want to make sure.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Larry Johnson was an NBA star in the 90s. He was on the Hornets and then the Knicks, and he starred in Converse commercials where he played a character called Grandmama, where he dressed up as his grandmother, and a grandma-coded basketball player.
The only NBA shoe commercials I remember as a kid would have Spike Lee in them. So Fairplay, milks the big, crowd reactions for all it's worth. Well, I already said that. Let me just say here. Fairplay says Sweeney has been his best friend for a long time, and they and Hero go to Hollywood and make the guys from Entourage look like Saved by the Bell. And I just got to say, between Jonny Fairplay and an Entourage reference, this might be the most 2007 segment we will cover on Through the Years.
On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, referencing Entourage in wrestling is more 2025 than anything, because who is the CEO of the parent company of WWE?
Ari Gold.
Oh, well, no, but isn't that who Ari? Isn't that who Ari? Isn't that who Ari Gold is based on? Ari Emanuel?
Yeah, I think so. I wish Jeremy Piven was in charge of the WWE.
It almost happened. He was general manager for a night.
Matt, your memory is just paying huge dividends tonight, and really every night. But he calls Hero, Fairplay calls Hero the greatest athlete in Ring of Honor history. He has a problem, though. ROH's fans suck. They could never be reality famous. This is another thing. I know we're interrupting this promo a lot, but I also think it's like another way this promo is so dated is the idea of like 2007 was still the time where like being famous at all, like on a reality show for 15 minutes of fame was like a big deal. Like that time you could never be reality famous, where I feel like nowadays, almost anyone, if you work a tiny bit, gets like very minor 15 minutes of fame, with social media and so many streaming and podcasts and stuff. Like it feels like being famous on a reality show does not matter anymore unless you're in like maybe a Real Housewife or something. Like I'm sure those people still have a following, but I feel like a Jonny Fairplay does not filter to the public consciousness the way he did back then. Like I feel just because fame is much more diffuse, it's more spread out, right?
Yeah, I mean, Trevor, you're pretty famous. Now I feel like my goal for 2025 should be to make it so someone on some wrestling show somewhere mentions Trevor by name. I feel like, CM Punk once made a Rob Naylor reference on an indie show during Necro Butcher versus Samoa Joe. I feel like we can get some MJF maybe. MJF, can you just talk about Trevor James just like once in a promo? Just once.
Matt,
he's gonna love it.
Yeah, I'm sure that won't make my online experience a living hell for 2 days. But Matt, if a wrestler ever mentions me in public, it will not be good, I imagine. But
I don't assume anything, Trevor. People like you. People really like you.
Matt, they okay. Chris Hero takes the mic, and just as he starts to talk, Fairplay attempts to throw a streamer back at a fan in the crowd because fans a couple of them threw streamers at them, but it must have missed, not even gotten back into the crowd because Fairplay gets a "you fucked up" chant, and Hero says that chant is so 2001. Hero says last night he was within 1 inch of snapping Bruno Sammartino's neck with a cravat when someone decided to interject themselves and ruin their fun. We get a big Nigel chant at this point. Hero calls him Nigel McLoser, which is very imaginative, Chris Hero, and demands he come out right now so he can get his revenge. Nigel comes to the ring and the match is on. Nigel McGuinness defeated Chris Hero with Jonny Fairplay and Larry Sweeney in his corner via pinfall in 9 minutes 41 seconds after he hit the Jonny Fairplay lariat, which he does hit in this match, but he also won the match with the jawbreaker lariat. I guess we should mention, which becomes kind of, I would say, the story of this match before I throw it to you, Matt. This match was filmed for a VH1 reality show star, Where Are They Now special that included Jonny Fairplay. In fact, the announcers take notice that there is a big annoying boob mic at ringside. There is a second camera, run by someone, or this VH1 cameraman. And this match is basically really a promotional segment for that. What'd you think about it?
It's kind of weird to think about like doing a Where Are They Now for somebody that was famous like 3 years ago, that seems too soon. But yeah, like, okay, so they're really, really lucky that they had the hottest crowd ever for this night during this match, because I feel like in a lot of places this would not get over this well, but it sure did get over very well here. Nigel has different music here, but the crowd is so loud that I couldn't totally make it out. Like that's how loud the crowd.
Either.
Yeah, and like, Gabe's on commentary. Like, okay, so the story of the match is the announcers just are including Gabe, who comes in, are just disgusted at the idea of Jonny Fairplay being present for ROH at all. And so it's like, oh, we hate this, and the crowd hates it, and it's like, but like the problem with that is like it actually is an annoying thing to have to watch in ROH. Like, I don't want to see Jonny Fairplay being the story of a match between two of the best wrestlers in Ring of Honor. And so, yes, it's like meta, the announcers acknowledge it, fine, but it's still not what I want to see. I mean, that said, it was over. The crowd did not shit on it. Gabe starts on commentary talking about how Fairplay is, quote, the worst person he had in ROH. Talks about some of the other infamous people like Insane Clown Posse, Conan, some dude from Canada, which he means Teddy Hart. Abdullah the Butcher, but he says he liked that one. I think it's weird to consider Abdullah the Butcher like infamous in the same way as some of those others, but and I mean Conan too, but Conan just didn't work out the first time he was
I like
there.
that he had to say Conan in 2002 because they brought Conan back, so he has to say, oh, the 2002 Conan, when they brought him back to work an actual match and the crowd shit on him.
But the problem is he came back the very next show in 2003 and was like, it was fine. So I feel like that's kind of unfair to Conan. I don't think he really fits that description. He had one match that didn't work. They mentioned Jeff Hardy at another point later. I think they were like Jeff Hardy or Jonny Fairplay, and I think they were like, let's let Jeff Hardy. Prazak says it's worse than Insane Clown Posse. It's really like just so over. It's almost like too much. Like how much they talk about how much they hate Jonny Fairplay, and it's certainly distracting from the actual match. Nigel's aggressive on the attack early, and Hero does one of those big Harley race styles up and over the turnbuckle bumps. And while he's doing it, someone in the crowd asks him, or one of the other Stooges, if he's wearing bowling shoes. I don't know if he's asking Hero that, or Fairplay, or Sweeney. I don't know, but somebody in the crowd audibly is like, "Are you wearing bowling shoes?" So somebody was wearing something that looked like bowling shoes. But yeah, so during the match, Hero gets Fairplay involved a lot. He calls Fairplay on the apron for a high five and a hug, and eventually, Nigel comes back with a bunch of lariats. Tower of London he goes for, but Fairplay and Sweeney grab his feet. They trip him, allowing for Hero to do a big leaping boot off the middle rope, which was actually pretty cool. Like, that was one of the coolest spots of the match. I don't remember him seeing that much. At one point, Hero does a Tracy Smothers tribute with like a combo. Then at one point, Nigel knocks Hero off the top rope, hits the Tower of London. Fairplay pulls him out of the ring. So Nigel chases him, and he ends up with Fairplay in the ring as Leonard yells, "Get him, Nigel!" And Nigel just destroys him with lariat to another one of like the biggest pops, like such a big pop for this lariat to Larry Sweeney before eventually hitting the lariat on Hero. So just a total Fairplay match. The other thing that I noticed during this, like when you mentioned the VH1 cameras, it just was like, hey, remember VH1? like that's just like such a cultural non-entity now that I'm pretty sure the channel still exists, but I do wonder if there are like young listeners who are like, VH what? Like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I'm not sure. But anywho, I was not really a fan of this. I thought it was hard to rate because it was so silly and the match felt like an afterthought, but it was high energy. The heat was tremendous. I don't know. I feel like in another world, these two could have had a Match of the Year candidate on a major show, but instead it was a sports entertainment special, and I wasn't really feeling it, but I cannot say it did not get over and was not effective. So that's my stance.
I don't think up in Canada we ever got VH1. We got some of the shows. Like, I think we had it on their channel, Carry Pop-Up Video. I remember that was the big thing. I was like, I want pop-up video. Where else am I going to find trivia bits about things I see on TV, Matt? Not the internet. But, the weird thing is we had, instead of MTV, our Canadian music channel was Much Music, and I think if I vaguely recall, we eventually came with like if Much Music's our version of MTV, we're gonna make a version of VH1, and we called it Much More Music, which I always thought was like the least imaginative. Like, just what's that?
Well, in America, we eventually had MTV2 also. So I don't know if Much More Music was more the MTV2, because by the late 90s, MTV was showing less and less actual music and more programming. Like, they had TRL, with Carson Daly, but like not a lot of just like we show videos now. And then MTV2 came along, and it was supposed to be the one that was more music focused and showed more indie stuff and things like, and they eventually moved like 120 minutes to MTV2 and things like that. And then MTV2 became that too. And I think, I don't have cable. I think both channels still exist, and they just show like reruns of very old sitcoms. Like, it's very funny how just all cable networks in America just are all like just reruns of stuff now. But I'm looking right now, MTV2, like it's like the Wayans brothers Marathon and Living Single. Like that's a Jamie Foxx show. I'm serious. That's what's on MTV2 now. So it's just does much music I feel like stayed true to its mission statement for longer than MTV did. Does Much Music still exist?
I don't even know, but I'll have to look up. But actually, I'm not going to look it up. You know why? Because then my screen will get brighter, and that's not good for my eyes. But
I'm gonna look it up, but you keep
yeah,
talking.
good. Okay, I'll talk about the match. We should talk about wrestling a little bit on the show, but I very much agreed with like the tone. I thought your tone of your review really hit it, which was this match wasn't that entertaining. It was kind of disappointing, but I mean, there was entertainment to be had, but like it was one of those things. I think the tone your review kind of settled on. Jonny Fairplay was annoying, but you can't say he wasn't over because the crowd really did have a great time getting on Jonny Fairplay's case. In fact, I would say, like you were saying, I kind of felt like you did. What you were saying was hard for you to rate this match. Yeah, because to me, the work itself in this match was very decent. It was just fine, but like this whole match felt about Jonny Fairplay. Like it was an excuse for them to film this segment and hopefully get ROH on VH1, because I would say that like 80 to 90% of what commentary talks about in this match is not the match. It's Jonny Fairplay. You point out how they compared they talk about VH1 is filming this. They at one point they even say like, oh, look, the giant boom mic is distracting some fans. And I just thought, well, whose fault is that? You let them come here. Prazak shits on Fairplay, saying he'd rather see Scott Baio or Corey Haim. And then, like you mentioned, Gabe gets on the mic and they run down all the legendary, like, hated figures in Ring of Honor history, which obviously this one is different because those were all booked presumably with the thought that, oh, the fans might like these people, and then the fans turned on them and didn't like them for some reason. They booked Jonny Fairplay. They got exactly, what you could have hoped for and expected from Jonny Fairplay. So I imagine this is just them playing it up, but Fairplay and Sweeney also interfere a fair bit in this match in full view of the ref, which I always find annoying. It all builds to Nigel getting Fairplay in the ring, leveling him with a lariat before immediately beating Hero with the jawbreaker lariat. And again, to be fair, the crowd went nuts for both of those things, those lariats.
Yeah, they're really nuts, but like I said, this is like the hottest crowd ever, so.
Yeah. As a match, I would say it was a little bit above average, but disappointing from Hero and Nigel, and it just really boilerplate stuff from these two. It wasn't really ambitious or imaginative at all. Like it really felt almost like they were toning it down just because the match was a vehicle for Jonny Fairplay and to hopefully get on VH1. Fairplay is very good at being annoying. I do think he fits the tone of Sweeney's stable, in that stable is all about like leaning into negative perceptions where people mocked Chris Hero's body, so they present him as the ultimate athlete. People, accused Tank Tolan of using steroids, so they market him as the all-natural personal trainer. And so, they're going to bring in Jonny Fairplay and call him an A-list celeb. It's the same thing. Speaking of Tank Tolan, where was he on this night? Because he was ringside the night before. Like, did they just not use him because they didn't want to take attention away from Fairplay? And I'll also say I think that the last two nights of the show were simultaneous. 2 nights of ROH that we've covered were simultaneous signs of just how high ROH was on Sweeney at this point, and how they were positioning Nigel at this point as the new like standard bearer of ROH, because Sweeney's getting to work with Bruno and Fairplay this weekend, and Nigel gets to be the guy that's defending, the legend last night, and tonight he's the guy who gets the rub off destroying everybody. And if Ring of Honor's hoping this gets some mainstream pub with airing on VH1, Nigel's the guy that's doing the big spot with Fairplay. So I think this is also a sign of, that everyone knew at this point that ROH was now fully behind trying to push Nigel as the next guy for the company. Matt, we also have...
I do want to just mention real quick. Okay. So, yeah, Much Music, Cash Cab for a few hours early in the morning, The Simpsons and Futurama, a couple of movies, including the movie called Pig, and a movie called, the movie Ghost Rider, and the sequel to Ghost Rider, then more Simpsons at night, and then in the middle of the night, the movie Sharktopus, and followed by the movie Sharktopus versus Whale Wolf. So yes, Much Music on that channel.
What are we even doing now? Like, what are we doing in cable television?
Canada is obviously experiencing the same trend of cable as the United States is. Jon Stewart, in his little bit this week that talked a lot about wrestling, even mentioned that The Daily Show is the only show left on Comedy Central that they actually produce. So, yeah, cable.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up because you showed me that clip, and I remember that too, where even Jon Stewart's like openly joking about how bereft cable is now of original programming. But so Matt, there are some notes about Jonny Fairplay here. So we'll go to the Observer first. Dave wrote, McGuinness absolutely destroyed Fairplay with a lariat to where Fairplay got a concussion. And then McGuinness did his pendulum clothesline on Hero for the win. And then the Pro Wrestling Torch wrote, ROH was featured during VH1's Where Are They Now reality star show this past week. The show featured clips of Jonny Fairplay's appearance at Supercard of Honor 2, which took place on March 31st. Fairplay appeared alongside Larry Sweeney in Chris Hero's corner when he faced Nigel McGuinness. Fairplay's segment featured him talking about Ring of Honor, and clips of him taking a clothesline from McGuinness aired several times during the show. Replays of the show should be available for frequent viewing this month and next. So, in fact, Nigel did make it. Ring of Honor apparently did get some pub off of this. Clearly just resulted in a massive boost to business. But and then for our last note on this segment, Matt, we'll go to the Figure 4 Weekly. Brian Alvarez would write at the time. Larry Sweeney came out and introduced Jonny Fairplay, who had a VH1 camera there following him around for some sort of wacky reality show. Now, I don't know if Brian is joking here or being honest, but Brian then wrote, I hope they were in the back later in the evening when someone pissed in his bag. Fairplay had heat because he showed up with his girlfriend, Michelle Deaton, who introduced herself to the guys as Michelle from America's Top Model. So
I don't know why that would make you have heat, but I guess wrestling is insane.
So that's the other thing I'm wondering if, is Gabe burying Fairplay so much now because the wrestlers didn't like him and he just wants to, because Fairplay was a dislikable guy. And again, with wrestling, you never know if these injuries are angles or not. I did find other notes that said Fairplay was at WrestleMania the next night in the crowd, and he was telling fans that ran into him there that he did get concussed from Nigel McGuinness.
But getting a concussion doesn't necessarily mean you can't sit in a crowd,
Yeah, no, I'm not doubting that. I'm just doubting in general, is he is this him working something or not? Because you never know. Because later in the same year, Matt, in another bit of Jonny Fairplay history, he was a guest presenter on a reality show award show, if such a thing existed back then. And he did a little segment with Danny Bonaducci, and Danny Bonaducci acted like he did not like Jonny Fairplay, which might have been reality. And then Fairplay jumps on him and wraps his legs around him and hugs him. And Bonaducci ended up just flipping Fairplay over his shoulder, and Fairplay lands on his face on the ground, apparently breaks his teeth, threatens to sue Bonaducci, and then later on they turned that into somewhat of a segment on another show where then they made up. So again, with Jonny Fairplay, I'm just saying I don't know what's real, what's not, but it's very possible he suffered a concussion here.
Yes, and he's a worker, but the point, if this concussion was a work, they didn't do anything with it, so that's why I don't think it was. Who did like Jonny Fairplay though? Pro Wrestling Torch's Bruce Mitchell. Weren't they childhood friends or longtime friends or something like that? I seem to recall that.
I remember he was on the Torch as a guest on podcasts more than once. I
think it was an association with Bruce Mitchell. That's my recollection.
Yeah. So, well, again, Fairplay was involved in wrestling before he ever got any kind of infamy. But after the match, Gabe gets on the mic and he says he was informed that the winner of this match would challenge Takeshi Morishima for the ROH World Title, and so Nigel now will challenge him in 2 shows' time in Edison, New Jersey. Meanwhile, Sweeney is seen carrying a limp Fairplay over his shoulders to the back, shouting, "We need medical attention," over and over again. Sweeney, as always, was great here. Our next Whitmer Jacobs history clip then airs, and it's a big one. It's Whitmer and Jimmy nearly dying a year prior at Dragon Gate Challenge when BJ slipped on the top turnbuckle and they fell to the floor. We then return to the ring with Roderick Strong and Davey Richards stepping inside and Roddy grabbing the mic. The crowd chants, "Please don't talk," at Roddy. Strong says the more they tell him not to talk, the more he'll talk. So unless they want this show to go until 3 o'clock in the morning, shut up.
I think this weekend might be the most over Roderick Strong and the No Remorse Corps ever felt as a heel group. Like, they really just got every bit of heat that they were asking for. This crowd was such a, like, I know I've been said it a lot. I can't get over what a good crowd this was.
Yeah, they were giving all the reactions that Ring of Honor would want. The crowd does not shut up. Roddy says as much as he'd like to throw Jack Evans around the ring again tonight, he can't, because tonight he has to teach Austin Aries a lesson. Tonight he has to teach him who led their tag team. Tonight he raises the prestige of the FIP World Heavyweight title. So now his buddy Davey Richards has announced it for you idiots. Davey, who also calls the fans idiots, introduces the man who will help send Jack Evans and Doi back to Dragon Gate broken, bruised, and battered, Rocky Romero. Rocky comes out wearing a No Remorse Corps shirt, and then Jack Evans music hits, and that brings us to Jack Evans and Naruki Doi defeated the No Remorse Corps of Davey Richards and Rocky Romero in 14 minutes, 22 seconds when Evans pinned Richards after hitting the 630 splash. So Matt, I'm actually going to throw this one to you again since I talked a bit, and but this is, even though they don't explicitly say it in Davey Richards' announcement, commentary makes it clear, and the fact that Romero's wearing the shirt, this is Rocky Romero's debut as an official member of the No Remorse Corps. So they are the first stable to start, and now they are the first of the stables during 2007's ROH Faction Warfare. The other two stables don't even really have official members yet. I guess you could say maybe Matt Cross was an official member, but even that they weren't quite saying it was official yet. But the No Remorse Corps, this is the complete group now. We got all three members. That's as big as they're going to get. What do you think about this match?
All right. Well, I think they tried to kind of go for like the Dragon Gate style thing where it builds slow and gets hot at the end. And I thought it didn't quite all come together the way like a good Dragon Gate style match does. But it was definitely better than the opener, in my opinion. It was more entertaining. There were a lot of cool spots. I'm not sure if I agree with the decision to debut a new member of the No Remorse Corps, debut a new team and have them lose immediately. But as far as things go, I guess just rating it as a match on its own, I thought that there was some cool stuff in it. Evans did another entrance promo to the camera saying he's not going to make any excuses for last night. Roderick got him, but when Evans and Doi get together, quote, bad things happen whether you have no remorse or not. Which I think Evans does good promos when he's coming to the ring. More and more he's doing that. Jack Evans early on almost does a hot tag sequence like right away, does some cool aerial stuff, holds Richards out for a somersault, senton by Doi. There's a spot where there's a few spots where Romero and Richards do some double team stuff. With like Romero holds Evans in a camel clutch while Richards does a running kick to his face and chest while squealing when he hits it. Richards definitely was enjoying taunting the crowd. He really takes over at certain points, just healing with the crowd, depriving them of kicks at different points, hitting kicks at other points. I thought Evans looked really good in the early sequence until he went for a springboard from the apron and Richard grabbed his foot and pulled him to the mat and just chucked him to the guardrail. Doi, he doesn't do quite as much as I thought. And actually, surprisingly, the crowd isn't as hot for Doi as they are for Evans. So Evans encourages them to chant for him. Like, usually the crowds are really into the Dragon Gate guys, and they will be later, but Doi was definitely less over than the ROH guys here. There's another spot where Richards keeps getting beaten up and he yells, "I'm winning," like he did the night before. There's a few strike exchanges with Romero and Doi, and at that point the crowd starts chanting for Doi. So he eventually gets the crowd to get into him. Late in the match, there's a really cool spot where Doi blocks the DR driver, gets Richards on his shoulder, and then Evans runs up the ropes, jumps off Richards' back into a moonsault on the floor on Romero, so sort of like a modified ode to the Bulldogs. And that was just insane. And before the crowd can even react, Doi hits a Doi 5 on Richards and gets a near fall off of that. So, I mean, that was definitely the highlight of the match. That was one of the coolest spots I've seen Evans do in a while, and he obviously does lots of cool spots all the time. So, I thought that was really, really cool. Eventually, the Evans and Richards get into a strike battle. Richards goes for the handspring kick, but Evans drop kicks him low. Then Evans goes for a handspring, but Richards catches him on his shoulders, and Evans hits him with a really nice poison rana. Unlike the one the night before that was a little bit labored, this one was pretty smooth. Then Doi, he drop kicks Richards to the floor again and holds him so Evans can go to the top rope. And Richards crotches Evans, and Evans ends up hitting a double knees out of the Tree of Woe position. And then he goes back up and he yells, "Dakota, this one's for you," and hits the 630 on Richards and gets the totally clean win on the brand new team. I don't know who Dakota is. But yeah, I thought it didn't totally flow together, but I thought that it was a cool match because there was some cool stuff in it. I will say, if it was any other promotion, I think they'd get a lot of criticism for No Remorse Core jobbing here in their first match together. But I think with ROH, that stuff just matters less if the match is good. And I do think the match was good.
This was, I thought, another good tag match. I'd say, again, somewhere between like 3.25, 3.5 stars. It follows a formula I like, which is Jack is facing peril and gets his butt kicked for a while. Although I will say I didn't think this was a great Jack Evans butt kicking. Like, I've seen better. I've seen more brutal ones. I've more bendy ones that were more imaginative. But I did like the spots you mentioned where they had Davey doing running kicks to Jack while he's stuck while Rocky had him in the camel clutch. I thought that was really cool. Doi and Rocky had a really big chop battle to start the match, and I liked how they returned to it in the middle of the match and just started hauling off and slapping each other in the face. When Doi and Jack get on offense, they bring out a few crazy things. You mentioned most of them. I thought that ode to the Bulldogs to the floor was really cool. Jack barely looked like cleared like the rope and the apron to get there, so that was a little scary, but pulled it off. I thought Jack almost goes a little bit low key near the end of the match, not low key as in low energy, but low key as in low key the wrestler, because there's a moment late where Davey Richards is doing his handspring, and while Davey's upside down mid handspring, Jack hits a pretty like brutal drop kick to like Davey's chest as he's upside down. There's not a lot of room for error there, and then he does the double knees, which he's done I think before, where which again almost feels like low key-esque, where his opponent's like hanging in the Tree of Woe, and then he gets his opponent to kind of sit up in the Tree of Woe, and then he comes down, hits them with double knees from the top. And then he does the Dakota, this one's for you. Maybe he just really loves the state. No, I think he was clearly talking about a fan in the crowd. But like you, the thing I was really struck by was the booking, where this is not only Davey Richards' millionth straight loss in Ring of Honor. Yeah, it is really weird in the world of wrestling where you almost never debut a new stable member and then have that stable member in that stable period lose the match where they're making their grand debut. You kind of want them to win the first night and to really spotlight the impact they're going to have. And instead they lose, and they lose clean here. I assume the logic is that Jack already lost the night before, and as the upcoming leader of his own faction, they didn't want him to lose to the No Remorse Corps on both shows this weekend. And looking at the booking coming up, starting with the very next show, Davey's going to do nothing but win for the next 2 months after doing nothing but losing for months and months and months. So it's that classic Gabe Sapolsky booking of you're going to lose a ton when I need you to, and then I'm going to flick a switch and all of a sudden you're going to win a ton. So yeah, I still don't like that, how it comes here, where it results in, hey, here's a new member and we're going to lose, but they are going to get the win starting with the next show. But we then get our next Whitmer versus Jacobs clip, which is BJ power bombing Jacobs into the crowd at In Your Face. That brings us to Homicide defeating Brent Albright by disqualification in 1:20. This doesn't go very long before Adam Pearce runs in. He attacks Homicide, causing the ref to call for the disqualification. He and Albright pound on Homicide 2-on-1 until Colt Cabana runs in and to make the save. As Pearce and Albright recover on the outside, Colt grabs the mic and says, "It's 1 year to the day that he and Homicide finished what was the most bloodiest and intense feud Ring of Honor has ever seen.
Not actually true. Not actually true. For the record, it was not 1 year to the day. It was that would have been April 1st. This was March 31st. So, sorry, Colt. I'm being pedantic.
Colt says at that time, Homicide shook his hand and gave him respect. Well, now Colt wants to give that respect back to Homicide. Colt suggests that they teamed up right now for the first time ever against Pierce and Albright. Right here, right now, Pierce and Albright attempt to walk to the back, but Cabana and Homicide chase and catch them, and the match is on. Colt Cabana and Homicide defeat Adam Pearce and Brent Albright in 12 minutes, 33 seconds when Cabana pinned Pearce after hitting him in the head with a can of mace. So on the surface, there's a lot of stuff in this match that might not be fully my bag. I haven't been bowled over by most of Brent Albright's work in ROH thus far. Jim Cornette ends up appearing in this match to remind us of the worst storyline of 2006 ROH. There's a ton of run-ins and interference, and yet I don't hate this match, Matt. They start with some crowd brawling and has some good energy, but as is often the case, we miss a lot of it due to camera work and lighting. Like there's apparently a big spot involving Colt and Pierce that gets the crowd chanting "Holy shit!" but we don't get to see it because the cameras do not catch it. We do see Homicide and Albright have a chair swinging duel. It then goes back in the ring. We get run-ins, like I said. Shane Hagedorn runs in. Pele Primo runs in to chase Hagedorn through the crowd to keep building up their eventual match coming up. Jim Cornette runs in, and then he stays at ringside for the rest of the match until the end, where he goes back in the ring to mace Colt, but instead he maces Pierce. Colt gets out of the way. Colt then hits Cornette with a bionic elbow. He hits Pierce with the can of mace for the win. Another thing here to mention is that there is a super loud extended Fire Russo chant when Cornette came out. And unlike some of the other anti-TNA things we've talked about in Ring of Honor on the DVDs that all get edited out of the DVD and we only know about them through live notes, I guess because this is during the match, they do not edit this out. They probably can't, so it stays in. But despite all of this, man, I kind of like this match just because it goes at a fast clip. No one's going to confuse this match with like a Dragon Gate match or a Briscoe's tag, but they work at a good pace. There's no downtime or filler. They're always moving. It's very breezy. This isn't maybe the slow-building Southern tag you might expect from some of the guys involved in this match. And I like matches of that style, but I think for me there was a bit of novelty on this for this match of just my expectations being subverted a little bit here, where I was like, oh, this is going a lot. This is a lot sprintier than I thought a match involving these guys with all this going on would be. Adam Pearce hit a really great-looking pile driver on Homicide in this match too, which I always appreciate. And the other thing, other thing I want to talk about with this match is there's a few examples here of ROH acknowledging history, and I want to say I love when Ring of Honor does this. I usually give them props for this. I love when all wrestling promotions acknowledge their history and don't ignore it. But I do have to maybe temper my praise and occasionally, like on a show like this, remind people that referencing history does not always add to a product in a major way. Like the example I use is in this match, they bring up that months earlier in late 2006, Brent Albright was the hired gun was hired to hurt Homicide's already injured shoulder right before his match the next day against Bryan Danielson at Final Battle. And it's great that they bring that up. It's better that they do bring it up than they don't bring it up. But on its own, that doesn't make me more excited to see this match. It's not a match I want to see in the first place. They didn't build to this match after that angle that they did on that show. Homicide and Albright went on to do completely different things that was largely forgotten about until now. Like, I just want to use this match. There's an example of the history gives you a reason for this match to happen, but it's not necessarily a compelling reason. There's a difference between a reason and a compelling reason. And it reminds me of a problem that AEW sometimes has where they will put on a match that feels cold, but if you look back, there is a storyline reason for it happening that happened like weeks or months earlier, but they did little or nothing to follow up on. So again, I just want to point out that there are reasons for things to happen and there are compelling reasons to happen. But overall, I'm a big fan of referencing history. When Colt wins the match after hitting Pierce with a foreign object, commentary says it's revenge for Pierce using brass knuckles last fall. So again, they're really going back on this stuff. They did basically just do that same story, and I'd say better with the Pierce and Delirious feud. But They at least tried, and of course, the biggest history they're referencing here is the Cult Homicide feud. And while I'm still conflicted on how they ended that, part of me still feels like wrestlers shouldn't ever be friends after their feud, particularly if it's a feud that involved attempted murder, like the Homicide Cult Cabana feud did. But they already gave up that ghost when they had Homicide and Cult shake hands right after that feud ended on that night. So I will say, I was fine with them. They gave you a fun full circle moment a year later with them teaming together. Although even that is kind of a retread on something they've done recently, which is the Homicide and Joe forming a super team after having a storied feud against each other. Now they're kind of doing the same thing here with another guy who's about to be on his way out. Although I guess both guys are about to be on their way out. But anyway, I can't believe I've spent this much time talking about this match. I will just say I'll give this like a very high above average. Maybe close to scraping like a flat 3 stars. I think, again, my expectations being low coming into this helped. I wasn't expecting much. I wasn't expecting something this fast and breezy. And it's a perfectly fine thing to have in the middle of a show with some big matches coming up on top.
Well, I have much less to say about this than you did. But I mean, not into seeing Cornette. He was in and out, though, so it's not really that big of a deal, obviously until the ending when he obviously is incredibly involved. I also think it's very interesting how much the crowd on this Detroit weekend are so into TNA and care so much about TNA's booking. I just didn't it just doesn't mirror my experience in 2007 of I'd go to ROH shows. I couldn't give a shit what was happening in TNA. You know what I mean? It wasn't. I didn't consider the two things of a part with each other. It was just I liked ROH. I didn't care about TNA because it wasn't very good a lot of the time. And that was that. Do you relate more with the crowd that really wanted Russo fired, or do you relate more with me in this situation?
I wasn't I don't think I had the anger that other people did. I think also we have to remember the time. This was right after Joe got pulled by TNA.
I remember, but I was following it, so I feel I don't know. I had my own emotions, and they were not this. That's all.
I would say I had a bit more frustration probably than you did about the idea that TNA had all this opportunity with the talent and the budget, and they were kind of squandering it. But in terms of I did not have the element. I don't think of TNA is stealing ROH's talent. I was just that's wrestling. I didn't have the you sold out gene in me when it came to this stuff.
Well, also again, I said for ROH's sake. It usually made ROH better when they had to freshen up the roster. I really feel that way. But anyway, as far as this match, I think what I didn't like about it is that I don't like the ROH trope of they do a big crazy crowd brawl. The brawl is entertaining, things are nuts, and then they go back into the ring and just have a match. It doesn't make sense to me. I feel that's backwards.
Yeah,
and that's what they did here. They had this crazy brawl, throwing each other on all kinds of chairs, having a Homicide and Albright having a chair duel in the crowd, and then they just get in the ring and have a normal tag team match. Yes, there was some fun stuff. Yes, it was pretty fast paced. Pierce hitting that pile driver, like you mentioned. And the double teaming on Albright with the butt followed by the running knee. Then the wacky finish with Cornette and Cornette spraying Pierce and the hitting the Pierce with the spray bottle and all that stuff. And that's fine. But it just doesn't work for me when they do that backwards thing where it's the beginning is so much more exciting than everything else that happens. And also I'm just wasn't into just this whole scene at this point. But again, it worked for the crowd. It totally did. They were into all the baby faces, so I can't knock it too much, but it wasn't for me.
Yeah, well, the good news is we will not be seeing Cornette going forward because the ThROH wrote, ROH is claiming that Cornette is not scheduled for any upcoming ROH events. So, yeah, this was just him in on WrestleMania weekend. But
it was way hotter than anything involving Cornette and Homicide in the last few months of 2006. I will say that.
Yeah, although like you've been saying for this whole show, pretty much everything was hot on this night, though. But
yes.
We then get our next Whitmer and Jacobs highlight clip, this one being Jacobs hitting a super contra code off of Danielson's shoulders at Throwdown. It took me a second. I was like, oh, yeah, they had like a three-way with Danielson. It's crazy that I completely forgot that didn't happen that long ago in the timeline. We then join Rebecca Bayless backstage with Eric Stevens. Stevens says he's been tearing it up in FIP, and now he's in ROH to show us all what he can do. Rest assured, this is just the beginning. The camera then pans over to find Austin Aries looking on with his hand on his chin in an almost comical manner. Like, I just wrote in all caps in my notes, man, this angle is so subtle. What does it all mean? And,
well, it also just looked creepy. Like, there's no way to do that. Like, a guy is standing behind you, looking and smiling and stroking his chin and nodding without it seeming creepy. There's no way to do it. I don't care how good of an actor they are.
Yeah, that might have to be the image of the show. Just Aries and like, oh, yeah. We then get another Whitmer versus Jacobs highlight clip. They're just spamming them at this point, them in a bloody brawl at Dethroned. We then at this point have a note from James Caldwell, then writer for the PW Torch. He was there, and he has a note about intermission. He wrote, during intermission, they set up the cage for the BJ Whitmer versus Jimmy Jacobs match, but they struggled getting the cage door in place, which meant intermission lasted over 20 minutes. Jonny Fairplay signed autographs during intermission while VH1 filmed a segment for an upcoming show looking at former reality stars and what they're up to now.
Intermission lasting over 20 mintes was not unusual at ROH. I feel like that was like, I think that sometimes it would last like 30 minutes. Like, it was, I feel like that's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, because I've talked about in the past, like Kerry Silkin at one point, he told that story during one of like the Bruno autograph signings where Gabe wanted to get the show on, and Kerry's like, this is where we make our money, like intermission. But, so there was always this push-pull of if the line for the merch was going good, how much do you want to like rush it along to keep the show breezy? I keep saying breezy tonight. Maybe that's just what I'm craving. But, versus, making the money. But
yeah. And by the way,
this does not seem long.
And by the way, this is when I'll add in my, my critique of the Jacobs and Whitmer, video highlight clips, which is the way they paced it. It was like they ended it months early. Like, they left out a lot of important, beats in the storyline, like Whitmer accidentally hitting Lacey with the shoe, and then that turning Jacobs even more psycho, and some like they just had a giant Falls Count Anywhere brawl, like they left that out. They just all the many brawls that we've covered over the past few months, they just stopped like 4 months before the match. It's very strange to me. I just felt like they should have had a different choice in how they presented this. If they were going to do it all, maybe like one highlight package. But it was just weird. Like, if you're going to do it, why do it and then, like, I don't know, cut it short? But I feel like the dissension clip was less important than the shoe clip if they were going to pick one of them.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. But that does bring us to the match. It is a pinfall or submission only steel cage match. No cage escape rules. Jimmy Jacobs, scored to the ring by Lacey, defeated BJ Whitmer, scored to the ring by Daisy Hayes, via pinfall in 24 minutes, 34 seconds after he hit a senton from the top of the cage through a table. So, Matt, this is a feud literally that is over a year long. This is we are at the end of it. Although, actually, these guys would have a couple big gimmick matches in 2008 in IWA Mid-South. But this is it. This is the end. This is the blow-off. What'd you think about a feud we have seen for so long? How big did it go in ending the whole thing here?
All right. Well, so first, I just want to start by saying this was not a flawless match. And I think that the main flaw for me was a particular rule that they had set up in the booking, which is that the cage door remains open, and that is to facilitate the idea that if one of the wrestlers or their seconds wants, they will call from the back the ROH staff, in this case being mostly Rhett Titus and also Bobby Dempsey, to bring out weapons for them. And that just meant that at different points during the match, it was interrupted by just these guys in ROH shirts and backwards caps coming out and giving them weapons. To me, that hurts the mood and the vibe a lot. And I really wasn't into that particular creative choice. Other things that I think make the match less than flawless. I completely understand why they thought it was important for the storyline for Lacey to take an adrenaline spike. I understand how that was built up to and all that stuff. I don't think it comes across well now, especially, coming from Whitmer, but even in general. And then also, I don't think the finish came off completely great. I felt like there was a little bit of awkwardness to the finish. All of those flaws aside, I still think this was a pretty incredible match. For one thing, it was just big moment after big moment after big moment to where they really had a lot of catharsis, a lot of climax in one big match. And I think they did everything that they should have done in order to make the match seem special. Definitely felt like Jimmy Jacobs played a big role in the creative here. I guess I can't say that for sure. Trevor, maybe you'll be able to speak to that more later, but it definitely feels like it. Whitmer is always game for these big brawls, taking everything that he needs to take and working his ass off. That's always the case. But this was definitely a Jimmy Jacobs moment and a crowning moment for him, I think. I maybe even one of his all-time peak moments, at least in Ring of Honor. Right at the beginning, Jacobs starts the match with a tope through the cage door as Whitmer is entering. So they brawl on the floor. At one point, Whitmer gets hit with an empty water bottle by Jacobs on the floor, which I don't think would hurt very much. But, improv. So they get into the ring. They start mainly, they're just chucking each other into the cage at first. Someone puts a chair in the cage, gives it to Whitmer. Whitmer puts the chair into Jacobs in the corner and drop kicks the chair into Jacobs' face. Jacobs chucks Whitmer's head into a chair that's on the mat. Whitmer spinebusters Jacobs on the chair. This kind of reminds me of CM Punk and Ace Steel against Whitmer and Moff, the Chicago street fight from Death Before Dishonor 2 Night 2, where they just kind of like do escalating weapon spots. So it starts with the chair, and then Red Titus runs out and gives Jacobs a railroad spike, which is kind of weird because Jacobs always just has the spike. In this case, Whitmer has his own spike. And in maybe the highlight of the match, they simultaneously spike each other. And they both sell it by falling to the mat 2 times each. And of course, this is when they blade big time. And then the third time they hit each other with the spike at the same time, they don't fall down and end up doing this like fast-paced repeated spiking to the head on each other, which makes the crowd just go berserk. And I would actually argue that spot got a top 5, one of the biggest pops in ROH history. Like the biggest pop I can remember besides one of the big title changes like Homicide Aries, Kenta Kobashi, and of course, what do you think I'm going to say next, Trevor, as far as big pops? Justin fucking credible. Yes, this was a just incredible level pop. Like, just unbelievable how loud they were for that spot. So it was a highlight. But, and then Jacobs, just to show that he's indeed a sick fuck, as the crowd says, he starts jabbing himself in the head with the spike. So, they clearly were going for this idea that this was a special level of brutality. And that spot in particular really got that over. Next spot that Red Titus brings out is a barbed wire baseball bat, which gets another big pop. And Jacobs ends up being the first one to hit Whitmer across the head. And then Whitmer starts getting his arm sliced up by the barbed wire, and I guess he either blades his arm or the barbed wire actually slices it because blood starts streaming down his arm. There's a spot where Jacobs put the barbed wire in his mouth and then sticks it in his hair, and there's a spot where Jacobs licks Whitmer's bloody face and then spits it back at him. So wrestling. Then there's a spot where Jacobs has 2 spikes in his hand and just alternates jabbing Whitmer in the head with each arm. There's a spot where Jacobs lays Whitmer's head across the barbed wire bat and concertos him across it. So at that point, I noticed that like Jacobs is in control for a pretty long stretch here. And Whitmer finally gets up, starts slapping back. He avoids a spear, sends Jacobs into a chair in the corner, hits an exploder. He is just covered in blood. Jacobs hits a Rana off the top rope. Whitmer rolls through, buckle bombs Jacob into the cage, and now he finally gets the bat, hits Jacobs with it, starts grinding him with the barbed wire, brainbusters him on an open chair, which then with another enormous pop. At that point, Lacey slams the cage door on Whitmer's head. Jacobs comes off the top rope with a senton, gets a near fall off of that. And then at what point Jacobs goes for a top rope Rana, but Whitmer just holds on and drops down, causing Jacobs' face to just smash into the turnbuckle. At that point, Titus and Dempsey both come out. They bring out a table. Whitmer goes for a top rope powerbomb, but Jacobs just turns it into a Rana, goes for the contra code. Whitmer counters that into the adrenaline spike. The tombstone gets a 2 count. That's a very cool move. And that's finally when Lacey enters the ring. And Whitmer hits her with the adrenaline spike, which again, I get it. I get it. Don't like it, but I get it. And it definitely worked for the crowd. Whitmer actually goes, at this point, all the way to the top of the cage, goes for a frog splash and misses. And Jacobs immediately hits the contra code, gets a big near fall, and then goes to check on Lacey. And in his anger, he angrily asks for a table. So I'm wondering if they brought out the table too early at that point, because they already brought it out, so I don't know why he'd be asking for it at that point. But whatever. Titus even helps Jacob set it up, and that visual I don't really like. You know what I mean? It just kind of it's weird in this these two guys are locked in a cage, but also just some guy is there and he's being their assistant. It's just kind of strange. But Jacobs puts Whitmer on top of the table and he climbs up the cage. But this is the part where I feel like it's a little bit awkward. Whitmer gets up. And they do the spot where Jacobs dangles from the top of the cage with one leg hanging on. It looks like Jacobs might fall all the way out of the cage, but he ends up knocking Whitmer off, and he just puts him back on the table and climbs back up and blows a kiss and comes off with a senton and gets the win. It was a cool spot, but I don't know, there was some awkwardness to it, and I feel like it was not the peak spot of the match compared to everything else they did. That aside, the match had nonstop huge moments, complete hate and intensity, seemed like a war, unbelievable crowd reactions. So I thought one of the best cage matches and blow-offs to a blood feud in ROH history. Came off incredibly well. I still think, despite the flaws, I still think it's my favorite ROH match of 2007 that we've watched so far. And still, one of the memorable bloodbaths in ROH history and a great moment for Jimmy Jacobs and BJ Whitmer. It was a really great match. Really great match.
And we are pretty simpatico on this review. I just thought, how do you end a feud that's literally been going on for over a year, that's seeing these two guys nearly kill each other and do a million crazy things to each other and bleed buckets, and you do this match? I'll start by saying I think doing making this a cage match where it's pinfall or submission only and not cage escape, I think that was absolutely the right call. I know some people hate the cage escape stipulation they don't think any cage match should ever be like that. Maybe because I was raised on those kinds of matches with the WWF and the big blue cage. I think there's a place for them, but I think in a match like this where I think the cage escape rule, it works if you have a cowardly heel as one of the competitors, because that makes sense to keep having that visual of the heels trying to just run from a fight. But I think in a match like this where it's about two guys who hate each other and they want to hurt each other bad, that visual of having them try and win by running from a fight, I think that's the wrong move. So I think that was absolutely the right move here to make it so it's only pin or submission. The other stip, though, like you said, the thing that bugged me, one of the big flaws, and I completely agree with you, is that the door can open whenever you want, and then students from the back hand you weapons. And I hate it. This one I'm more torn on. I dislike it for a couple of reasons, but I can understand one of those reasons. I would say I really hate that so many modern cage matches, particularly War Games matches in AEW and WWE, but others too, all over wrestling, have just become plunder matches where the focus is not on the cage, it's on having every weapon you can have in the world thrown into the cage and used. Like, I'm not opposed to plunder matches at all. I like plunder matches, but if you want to do one, to me, I think do a plunder match. To me, a cage match is a special match. It's its own thing, it has its own like range of possibilities of things you can do with it. I don't want weapons to distract from those things. If you want a plunder match, you don't need a cage for it. You don't need to screw it up by throwing in a million weapons. But why I'm more forgiving of that here is this is blowing off a feud where these two have done everything under the sun to each other. So it makes sense that they'd want to use every weapon, both in like a kayfabe sense where, they want to hurt each other with every way they can, but also in that non-kayfabe, like, we're trying to blow off this feud where we've done so much. We're going to need like everything for this match. We're going to need every prop, every idea. And like, to show the expectations of this match, this is a match where the crowd is chanting, "Please don't die" at Jimmy before he even enters the cage, like on his entrance. Like, the crowd is expecting insanity, and they do everything they can to deliver that. What I'm not forgiving of is something, Matt, you talked about quite a bit, which is how they handled the weapon stuff, which is the most corny, dorky thing that every time these guys want a weapon, they have to call for it, and then a student has to frantically run to or from the back, grab it, throw it in the cage, and then, like you mentioned, Red Tie's having to help Jimmy with a table in this brutal cage that is so off-putting and dumb. And the thing that bugs me is you had Lacey and Daisy at ringside the whole match. You could have at least made it feel more organic and given them honestly more to do, but at least having them like grab the weapons from under the ring, why like, I don't know why you had to do this really artificial feeling dorky thing with the students and running to the back room and stuff. The women could have gotten the table, the barbed wire bat, the spikes, the chair, all that stuff. But anyway, going to the match, I thought even just the opening was fantastic, where Jimmy does the tope through the open cage door onto Whitmer as Whitmer's making his entrance, because the way they shoot it, they don't telegraph at all. You don't see it that's going to happen until like a half second before it happens. So it's such a great little surprise. It really opens the match up in a crazy way. And from there, we get a match that is 24 minutes long. And Matt, you did an excellent job of recapping it. You named most of the moves of the match, and I think that was warranted in this match, because I think almost everything these guys do in this match is either a big spot, a brutal spot, or both. Like, almost everything in this match is like a highlight reel thing. This was WrestleMania weekend, and these guys worked like this was their WrestleMania main event, where they're kicking out of everything, they're doing everything. This is a real, we're emptying the tank match in a setting at the end of a feud that's been over a year long. It's appropriate to do that. Very early on, Jacobs breaks off most of a front tooth. I don't know what spot it was. I only noticed after he got like hit in the back with a chair, I think. And then we get all the spike spots you mentioned, which is fitting because the spike has been such a huge part of the feud. I agree. For me, those moments early on, just that intensity and the crowd reaction, to me, that might have been the highlight of this whole match. This also allows both those guys, the spike spots allow both the guys to blade. And while they've both done fantastic blade jobs in different matches recently, BJ might have topped himself here. This might be like, I keep saying this for the last few matches these guys have had in 2007, but these guys have had a few blade jobs in the first few months of this year that have like contenders for top 10 ROH blade jobs ever. There's a moment during this, though, if you notice, where after the first time the two guys spike each other, they're down selling. And if you listen closely, you can hear Jimmy tell the ref, "I've got one more to go. I'm fine." And heard that, and I went back to make sure I heard it. I go, "What's he talking about?" And then you see them get up, and they do a second spot where they simultaneously hit each other with spikes in the head again. And when they pop up to do that spot, BJ's bleeding, but Jimmy isn't. And after that second simultaneous spike spot, Jimmy's bleeding too. So I assume the ref was like, "Do you need another blade or whatever?" And Jimmy's literally telling him like, "I've got one more of these spots. Don't worry, I'll be bleeding after that one." So it was just interesting to hear something that audible. And Jimmy was actually calling a bunch of stuff pretty loudly in this match. So to me, the first third of this match is my favorite. There's a more urgent pace. There's a bit more hate. It's a bit uglier in a way I like. That's, I think, warranted for this kind of match. There's that spot where BJ is there's a spot where BJ is charging Jimmy, and Jimmy grabs a barbed wire bat at the last second with both hands and raises up to hit BJ in the head to defend himself. And immediately afterwards, because he had to grab it with both hands, he had to grab it by the barbed wire and not just the handle. You can see Jimmy selling and checking on his hand. And I don't know if that was real or selling, but either way, I loved it because it was just such a neat in the moment spot where it's a guy who had to grab this barbed wire weapon in an unsafe way out of desperation because he had no time, and it working, but also him paying the price. And then we get the barbed wire spot to the arm where Jimmy hit him really hard in the arm with that barbed wire bat. And like you said, I don't know if he bladed or not, but either way, I love me some, I'm a ghoul. I love me some blood from a non-forehead spot in a wrestling match. The double fisting spikes, you said, all of that. You know, the first section of this match is just so brutal and ugly in a good way. And Jimmy gets to do some fun visuals. He puts the barbed wire bat in his mouth, on his hair. He does another one of those spots where he's been doing so many spots lately where he like gets his opponent to bleed on him, and this time he gets it. He licks the blood and spits it into BJ's own face. The second half of the match, to me, it's slowed down a bit. In one way, that's fitting because these two should be selling that it's a war. But then we start to lose a bit of that pace and hatred I like. It starts to become a bit more, here's our next planned big spot. Here's our next planned big spot. We sell, and then we set up the next one. I like my matches like this to feel a little bit more like real hateful fights and a little less like stunt shows. But I will say I've seen other matches go way further in that direction, and it's hard for me to be too negative on anything in this match when everything they're doing is crazy, is a spectacle, is really exciting. You know, BJ, like you said, doing that brainbuster on the open chair, like you said, I agree. Other than the spike battle to start early on, that might have been the biggest pop of the entire show.
The entire year. I really feel that way.
Insane pops. And Lacey gets the adrenaline spike, like you said. I'm just going through my notes. And then BJ and Jimmy redo the powerbomb off the top turnbuckle, reversed into a Rana spot that they tried and almost died attempting a year ago on the WrestleMania week in 2006. But this time I thought not only did they hit it, they hit maybe one of the prettiest versions of it I've ever seen, where Jimmy basically starts doing the Rana reversal like in mid-flight, where BJ's already like jumped off and they're kind of like flying halfway through. And I just thought they hit it really well this time. And I thought that was like satisfying, knowing how the feud really started in some ways off of them not doing it, and they just doing it really beautiful. And then of course it all ends with your obligatory cage match, top of the cage spot. When I was thinking about this match, I thought of like one of Mick Foley's famous ECW promos where he talks about the nature of what hardcore wrestling is. He's offended that there's this promo where he's offended that Tommy Dreamer has branded him as the originator of hardcore wrestling, and he starts talking about the hardcore wrestlers that came before him. Like he names guys like Ray Stevens and Harley Race and Dynamite Kid. And now the point of that promo was probably how Mick ends up talking about how their bodies were broken and they didn't get financially compensated or remembered the way they should have been for those things. But another point to that promo is Mick basically saying that to him, hardcore wrestling was more than just weapons and blood. It was the mentality of wrestlers giving more physically and emotionally than they had to. Because after all, like all the guys I just mentioned, they weren't like known as like hardcore weapons wrestlers, but they were wrestling. You know, it was the idea that for most of wrestling's history, wrestlers tried to get away by doing as little physically as it took to get over and no more. And what Foley considered hardcore was wrestlers that went the extra mile, the guys who would appeal to the hardcore fans, and hardcore fans not in the sense of they like blood and guts wrestling, but they appreciated the wrestlers that they could tell went the extra mile physically for them. Now, to me, some wrestlers are hardcore in the weapons match perspective. Some wrestlers are hardcore in that way Foley was talking about. Some are both. Like I think you can safely say Mick Foley was both. Like Mick Foley would do weapons matches, but he would also do crazy physical bumps on a random singles match on an episode of WCW Saturday Night. I think this match and this entire Jimmy Jacobs Whitmer feud was about these guys being both kinds of hardcore. Like this was a feud that was all about it started really on a huge botch where Jacobs nearly died and Whitmer broke his ankle and continued to wrestle for months after. Jimmy comes into this match wearing a huge knee brace. He's going to need surgery after this match is done. You can tell late in the match he aggravates his leg and it's limping a lot. He's been gutting out the final matches of this feud, needing surgery. This is a feud that always felt reckless and dangerous. It's a match where he broke his tooth off early on, and these guys blood buckets. They took crazy risks. And that's not for everyone. That kind of hardcore element of wrestling, both kinds, there are arguments against it. I think a lot of wrestlers, particularly from the old days, they have the mindset that nothing in wrestling should really hurt. And if you get hurt doing something, you fucked up. And if you get hurt doing something where you knew ahead of time you were probably going to get hurt, then you really fucked up. I think to like Bret Hart saying, he being so proud that he never hurt anyone in the ring and not even liking that taking Ric Flair's chops, because even though they didn't injure, they still hurt. And parts of me do relate to the idea that the art of pro wrestling is to simulate violence and not actually get hurt. But I can also appreciate wrestling feuds like this, where these guys were clearly giving pieces of their body for this feud. To me, this was a great match, like a strong 4 stars, maybe going into 4.25. I mean, I will say, the energy and that ugly brutality of the first third of this to a half of this match, that was trending in my mind to going to 4.5 stars or even higher. But then when it became just about setting up one big spot after another with them a little less grace to it, I would say, as weird as it is to use grace describing a match like this, it took it down just a notch for me. But I was still very much able to appreciate this match for what it was. And I think I can end by saying, one of the biggest compliments I can give this match is when I was a little kid, I'd read the wrestling magazines, and this was during a time when I only had access to WWF TV. And so I'd read these magazines, and they would be my first exposure to Cactus Jack and ECW and Abdullah the Butcher and the Headhunters and Fire Angles in Memphis and hardcore wrestling in general. And I'd stare at the pictures in the magazines, and I would just imagine as a little kid what those matches must look like. And then years later, I grew up, you get tapes, you find footage online, and you get to watch some of the stuff you only imagined about. And some of the things lived up to my imagination, and some of them didn't. The biggest compliment and way I can describe this match is this match felt exactly like my ideal match I would have imagined in my head after seeing one of those Pro Wrestling Illustrated articles about a hardcore match. This would have been my imagination run wild, and this match was exactly that match in terms of brutality and spots and what they're attempting. And yeah, I just want to give it some. I think we should also give some props, Matt, to just everyone involved in this match, because think about a year before this match. Before this match, we were at WrestleMania weekend 2006, and Jacobs has talked about this. That Whitmer and Jacobs match in 2006 WrestleMania weekend was basically supposed to be the end of Jimmy's run in Ring of Honor. BJ was going to continue on, but sounded like Gabe and Jimmy talked, and Gabe told him, I don't really have anything for you after this. And then Jimmy did the Ballad of Lacey music video, and that on his own accord, and that saved his career. But then BJ, by accident that weekend, nearly killed them both on that top rope powerbomb spot. And that gave them reason to keep the feud going and change the tone of it. Because I imagine that feud probably Jimmy would have stayed in Ring of Honor because of the Ballad of Lacey, but I don't think they would have dropped the feud a whole extra year if they didn't have that huge thing to play off of and reference and build off of. And I think it is huge credit to those guys that 1 year after that feud was scheduled to be the end of not just the feud, but the end of Jimmy Jacobs' career, they're now back in the WrestleMania weekend. They're now one of the biggest matches on the entire night. Jimmy's now not losing on his way out. He's winning the match as the heel. And some credit to Gabe too, right? Because we talked about how they overdid. Gabe does something with feuds a lot. He did it with this feud where he kind of draws out the middle chapter or a chapter near the end before the scheduled big finish. Sometimes a little too long. He'll repeat certain beats too much. And that happened here. But I also should give him some credit. This is a feud that went over a year long, and I think they did a good job of never letting it cool off, but never always coming back to it enough that it didn't ever – you didn't forget about it. They did a good way of weaving in other feuds. You had the mini Whitmer Albright feud weaved in. You had the Colt Cabana Jacobs feud that got weaved into it, and then it ended up kind of combining with this feud. I think Gabe did a really good job of all of that. So I think this was a big win for everybody involved.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say I like this match even more than you did, honestly. Like, if it wasn't for those few flaws I mentioned at the beginning, I would say it was a 5-star match. Like, I just like it's a pretty special atmosphere and moment. I would still say like 4.5 would be like the absolute minimum I would give this. Probably more like 4.75. Like this is just to me, it's an all timer. Like an all time like one of the matches I think about when I think about my favorite ROH matches. Like it's just yeah, for all the reasons you said. What the way the wrestlers and Jimmy especially turned something that could have been something fairly forgettable into something very special. Um, the way that they elevated the brutality in not just a masochistic way, but also a very creative way. One thing that makes a 5-star match for me is emotion. And while I said like there were flaws that took it out of that range, like I think there you don't I can't think of too many ROH matches that had so much storyline based emotion compared to this one. Like there were other matches that had emotion based on real things going on, like CM Punk leaving, or like the the incredible feeling of Kobashi being an ROH, or Homicide finally winning the title and stuff like that. But this was emotion that was purely based on storyline and character, and I don't think ROH did that too often. And this match delivered on that. And yeah, it was still very special as far as major blood feuds go in Ring of Honor.
And I do have one big tidbit about this match, Matt. You were wondering if I had some insight to it. Not from Jimmy Jacobs, but from BJ Whitmer. And I'm proud because, Matt, not every podcast will go to the trouble of watching Smart Mark Video's BJ Whitmer shoot interview just to get you an extra tidbit.
That is true. That is true, Trevor. Not every podcast would.
But because of that,
this podcast wouldn't even if it wasn't for you. So go ahead.
Because of that, I have an interesting. So you talked about how the finish was not quite fitting and kind of awkward for you. What if I told you, Matt, that the finish we saw was not the first planned finish they wanted to do, and it wasn't even the second planned finish they wanted to do?
I would say I fully suspected that, is what I would say.
So we will go to BJ Whitmer's shoot interview with Smart Mark Video, which it's a fairly entertaining interview if you're interested in BJ Whitmer, but I feel weird plugging it based on where BJ Whitmer is in his life right now and what he's revealed to have been willing to do. But I credit sources. So Whitmer, this is just it's not a word for word transcript, but it's just a recap of this section, the things I thought would be interesting for the show. Whitmer says this is another one of his favorite matches, but they didn't get to do the finish they wanted. His and Jimmy's original idea was, with the match featuring ROH wrestling school students bringing them weapons throughout the match, that the last weapon they'd bring would be one of the scramble cage platforms. So for those that don't remember, the scramble cage matches, ROH had only done a few of them, were just cage matches where they had 4 big platforms that would sit on the corners of the cage, and they'd be big enough for like 2 people to stand on, with the idea being these are cage matches full of high flyers where because of these platforms that really let the flyers get really good footing, they can do even crazier things off the top of a cage than if you're just trying to balance on a thin rung of a cage. So they wanted to end this match by getting one of those platforms, and they wanted them to then set up the platform on top of the cage so that BJ and Jimmy could both stand on the platform together. And then they were going to end the match by doing the spot 1 year earlier that they almost died on, the Jimmy reversing a top rope power bomb into a Rana off of the top of the cage using the scramble cage platform. And why they couldn't they wanted to bring the whole feud, whole circle that way. Why they couldn't do that, this is such an indie wrestling thing. BJ says, unfortunately, the scramble cage platforms were made out of wood, and someone had put the platforms where it rained, which resulted in the wood warping enough that when they got the platforms and tried to test it out and put them on top of the cage, the platforms would not sit evenly on the cage and they wobbled. And so they did not feel comfortable to do the spot then with those. So they threw that out. So
I'm kind of surprised knowing those guys that they didn't just try it anyway. I'm glad they didn't, but it
think how crazy it had to be for them to go no.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then their second idea was they wanted to do a spot with a flaming table for the finish. BJ says he and Jimmy actually went above Gabe's head and asked Kerry Silken if they could do it. Kerry was cool with it, but then it got back to Gabe, and they said Gabe got pissed that they, one, went over his head, and two, he just didn't want them to do a flaming table spot in general. And so what the spot we get is actually their third choice. Whitmer ends by saying he thinks that the match was partially responsible for drawing the crowd, and he's really proud of it. And yeah, so the original planned finish was Rana off the top of the cage. Second plan was flaming. Do we ever see a flaming table spot in the Gabe era of Ring of Honor? I don't think we do.
Not to my recollection.
So that this must be something that Gabe was just philosophically opposed to, is the idea of using fire.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, you know what? If I was a wrestling promoter booker, I would also refuse to allow that. It just seems like fire is just something that you know. I mean, I know there are professionals that feel like they know how to control it. I feel like if it gets out of control, it gets out of control. You know what I mean? Like, I don't blame Gabe one bit for that. Do you think this should have been the main event of the show? Because I do.
I think it kind of deserved it, but we'll talk about it a bit more when we get to the Dragon Gate match. But, you know, it's weird. Like, I was thinking, if I'm those wrestlers, I might want it at this spot on the show, though, just because then I don't have to follow the Dragon Gate match. I think this match could have followed it because it's so different and the spots are so big.
And the crowd was just so nonstop hot, which would have helped too.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like they deserved it, but as I can't feel that bad because I feel like they still got a huge reaction. They still got a very plum spot on the show.
Yeah, I meant more for the people that came after them more than less than for them. Yeah.
We'll go to the PW Torch quickly. Gabe Sapolsky talked to the Torch, and they wrote at the time, Sapolsky believes that both men have made themselves impact players in ROH as a result of their lengthy feud. Quote, BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs took it upon themselves and really made this feud into something special, he says. The cage match blew off in Detroit had the crowd absolutely captivated. They have really both made themselves into important players in ROH. Both men suffered injuries as a result of the match. Whitmer should return to action shortly, but Jacobs will be out of action for a long period of time after suffering a torn ACL. In fact, we'd go to the Torch for another quote. They would write, BJ Whitmer suffered a neck injury during the cage match and is expected to miss the ROH return to the Long Island and Edison, New Jersey on the weekend of April 13th and 14th, which he would not work matches on those shows. And then we go to the Observer. Dave Meltzer would write, Jimmy Jacobs is undergoing his surgery for a torn ACL on April 20th, and he'll be out of action for 6 to 9 months. He said it wasn't a major impact injury that tore the ACL as much as the wear and tear of 5 years of wrestling. His knee has been shot for a while, but he worked through the blow-off of his feud with BJ Whitmer in a cage match because he's not expensive to bring in and it's entertaining. The plan is to use him as a regular doing backstage vignettes for DVDs until he's able to wrestle. So again, this is a really shows you how far Jimmy has gone, where he went from, again, almost – this is one of the great examples of a guy kind of saving their career, where it went from him in 1 year span from him being almost out to the point of, like, Gabe's now obviously got big plans for him now. He wants to keep using him on video segments even when he's not there. And this was also a year – I'm sure this we know this happens in wrestling all the time, but feels like we've been seeing a lot in the last year of Ring of Honor that we've been covering, guys that are, like, gutting through injuries to get through the end of a feud. Because we saw Whitmer breaks his ankle – and he guts through it for like another month or two at least to do the CZW feud to the end. Bryan Danielson hurts his shoulder real bad. He gets to the end of the Homicide thing and drops the title of the Homicide. Jimmy Ray breaks his jaw. He guts through that for a few shows so they can get to the end of the Nigel feud. And now Jimmy Jacobs, clearly he'd been working with it, like a really screwed up knee for a while. He'd been wearing that big knee brace for a while now. And he guts through it until he gets to the end of this feud and then instantly gets surgery. So a lot of guys this year just needing surgery and deciding, I'm just going to keep going until our feud is done for indie wrestling. So, which shows you how much ROH meant to these guys.
For sure, yeah.
And that brings us to immediately after the match, the guys get a standing ovation. That was awesome. Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, BJ chants. Jimmy and BJ sell for a long time, and Jimmy has the ref help pull off his knee brace and boot, at one point screaming, fuck, 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 in pain super loudly. We see an entire wall of the cage being taken down and Lacey being carried by a student to the back. Jimmy hops on one foot to the back as fans congratulate him and touch his back to like touch him like, way to go, Jimmy, on the back. In what sounds like a very real tone of voice, he screams, "Get the fuck away from me," like really loudly at them. That leaves Whitmer still selling in the ring as Daisy Hayes and some refs continue to check on him. Whitmer eventually gets up with help from Daisy, and he gets a big reaction too. That brings us to the FIP World Heavyweight title match. Roderick Strong successfully defends the title, defeating Austin Aries via ref stoppage in 21 minutes, 56 seconds when Aries passed out in the Stronghold. This is the first time these two wrestled each other in a singles match in Ring of Honor, but not in wrestling. They first had a match in FIP in 2005 that was all the way back when Aries was the ROH World Champion, and he actually defended the world title against Roddy in FIP. And they also had an 8-minute match in 2005 on a TNA pay-per-view. But this is their first singles match in Ring of Honor. Sometimes the semi-main event of a big show can be a tough spot on the card and I felt like this show kind of had the ingredients for that. The match below it, third from the top, is this super huge, crazy spectacle that would be hard to follow in any scenario. And then you're right before a really anticipated main event that the crowd might be antsy that, like, let's just get on with it so we can see that match. So I felt like this is kind of a tough spot. And I don't think this match was a death spot. The crowd does make noise. They have fun razzing Roderick. They pop for big spots. They pop big near the end when Aries beats a count out. But I do think this is a match on a different night. It maybe gets another notch more from the fans, but I think it's still impressive that this crowd gave them what they did, because I think on a lot of shows they might not have given them even this much. To me, this match is right on the border of good and very good, like 3.5 to 3 3/4. I think they did a reasonably good job of doing enough to feel fitting for a big time, first time we're doing this in Ring of Honor encounter on a major show, but they also left enough for room to grow on rematches. They pull out a few neat special things here, like Aries does this regular K-Brada, but then later he does a second one where Roddy is like standing on the apron, like bent over the second rope, draped over it, and Aries hits the K-Brada from that position. This match, because it's FIP rules, means there's a 20 count on the floor, which Ring of Honor usually doesn't have countouts. So it is we get a countout tease after Roddy takes the Death Valley driver on the apron, and then we get another one near the end of the match where Roddy pulls down a barricade and he Gibson drivers Aries onto it. And I thought that was smart booking, because it's a way to give Aries a little win, even though he's taking a clean loss here, because Roddy had just started using the Gibson driver on the barricade as kind of this kill shot move where they had him use it to take out Delirious. They had him use it to take out Matt Cross and do an injury angle for Matt Cross. So the idea that, okay, Aries loses the match, but he at least survives this move that like no one else has survived so far, it gives him something to kind of take away from this match. What was humorous about it, though, was we just talked about Rhett Titus helping set up the table during the last match. Roddy has a hard time separating the barricade here, and eventually, if you look closely, you can see at the edge of your screen one of the cameramen is actually helping Roddy lift the barricade while he's holding the camera.
That. I totally missed that.
Yeah. So it is a night of people helping these wrestlers as they desperately manage props. They also did a couple spots where they countered each other's stuff, but they didn't go very crazy with that. And I'm on two minds of that. On one hand, sometimes I like when former partners face each other and they like do the story where they know each other so well they're countering everything. But on the other hand, sometimes that they can overdo that and it gets cutesy. And so I'll give credit to them. They definitely did not go overboard and cutesy with it here. They did a little bit of it, but they didn't do like a million I know everything you do counter spots here. There is one spot, though, where I don't know what happened. Aries goes to the top turnbuckle to hit the 450. Roddy follows him up, and he cuts him off. And so they're fighting on the top turnbuckle. And Aries just slips off the top turnbuckle and falls through the timekeeper's table. So now I'm going to want your opinion on this, because on one hand, one sense you'd think it was planned because he fell from the one corner of the ring where he could safely fall on a table instead of just straight to the floor. But on the other hand, he just slips off. Even the announcers like acknowledge that, like Roddy doesn't touch him, he doesn't throw him. Aries just slips off the turnbuckle to the floor, and I have a hard time thinking that they would do a spot where instead of giving like Roddy the credit, like that they would just have, oh, you're going to fight, and then Aries, you're just going to slip and you're going to fall through a table. either way, I thought it was like a wild moment because they use a handheld cam for that shot where it's in super tight and you don't see it coming at all, and especially because the table he falls through is just the timekeeper's table. So like you're not seeing it's coming, because normally they would have, for a planned table spot, they would have set up a table and you would have known like, oh, if it's happening 5 minutes, it's going to happen. It might take 5 minutes from now, but it's going to happen. You don't see it coming here, so I thought that was a real shocking spot out of nowhere. But I want to ask you, like, do you think that was planned or like a legit accident?
I totally think it was planned. Didn't even occur to me that it was an accident, honestly, until you just said it. Like, it was a really cool spot, and like like sometimes that's cool. Like Yokozuna lost the WWF title to Bret Hart by just slipping off the middle rope. Bret didn't do anything. Sometimes that works.
I remember being so disappointed with that as a kid, because I had to wait months to rent WrestleMania 10. My parents did not buy it, and Bret was my favorite wrestler. And I remember watching it, and I was like, "That's how he won." Yoko just slipped.
Yeah, I mean, it worked well enough for the crowd. This, I think, was real. It's my favorite kind of table spot where you just don't see it coming at all. Those are the ones that so I thought that was honestly my favorite thing in the whole match. So yeah, I mean, I'll watch it again and see, but at least until you said it, I did not consider that it might have been just a total fuck up, but maybe.
So yeah, I'll just end my thoughts by saying, like, stylistically, again, I feel kind of bad for this match because it's right after a crazy gimmick match that you can't do often, and it's right before this match from this state-of-the-art style a lot of people in the U.S. scene were falling in love with, while this was just, I thought, more a very good but not great version of the kind of wrestling you saw in Ring of Honor most shows in the main event scene. So there's a little hate here, but there's not much as much as the prior match. It's kind of like when on this match on this night was kind of like Christmas, where it's you kind of push away your old toys, even though they're perfectly good toys, because you're getting cool special things you don't get the rest of the year. And this match was kind of surrounded by like special Christmas presents that Ring of Honor wasn't getting very often.
Yeah, I think I'll disagree with you on a few points here. First, I do not think that they would get better reactions from another crowd. I don't think they did a match that would get better reactions. And I think this, again, the hottest crowd I've ever seen, baby. I think they did. They gave them what this match, I think, should have gotten. And I think it was a good crowd reactions to a good match. But I think a match that I don't think hit totally the right notes. This was a huge breakup. This is their first match. The match with Strong and Evans the night before, I think, got it right. Evans did attack right away. There was a lot of wild stuff that you wouldn't normally see. It was a little bit extra intense and violent. And I don't think this match was that. It was a little bit too cutesy early. They started with a lockup, an intense lockup, but still a lockup for what should have been, a hate-filled feud. This was a big, Roderick turned on Aries, and violently attacked him to start his own group. It just didn't make sense for this match to be what it was. The other thing is, because there was no ROH title on this show, this match was supposed to stand in as the world title match on the show, right? It was for the FIP title. And I don't think they worked the same match they would have worked if this was an ROH world title match. And I think maybe they should have. So it was good because these guys are both great wrestlers. But I like the stuff early with Aries being the one who could always avoid Strong's chops and then hit him with the overhand chops of his own. I also like, when they're doing the camel clutch, they work the hold. Aries is trying to turn it into a pinning combo. Strong keeps modifying it. Makes it much more interesting than as opposed to just being sort of a rest hold. I liked Strong's slingshot, almost like jackhammer that he did. They do cool stuff. It's definitely a good match. But I felt like it was not super interesting until we get near the end with the Death Valley driver on the apron, and then as you get further on, the spot where Aries just blocks the superplex but falls all the way from the rope to the timekeeper's table. And then it starts feeling a little bit special, with the guardrail stuff and the Gibson driver on the guardrail, and Aries getting back in the ring before the 20 count, which got a really good pop from this crowd. I think as good a pop as you'd expect. And, I think that the main thing that could have elevated it from that point would have been you go into a hotter series of near falls. Instead, they kind of do the same thing they did the night before with Strong hitting the sick kick, half Nelson backbreaker, Gibson driver, Strong hold, and then Aries passes out and Strong wins. So they never really get a strong tease that Aries might win the match. So I didn't think it was that interesting. I know you said they were holding back for future matches. I think maybe for the spot they were in, they held back a little too much.
Yeah.
But it was still good. But I think when you compare it to the other matches that were surrounding it and to the Strong versus Evans match the night before, I think it didn't quite hit the mark.
Do you think there also could be a mindset, even just like looking at the show, being like, the Dragon Gate match is about to come up. We just saw the cage match. Like, we don't need to be like a show stealer on this night. We can save it. Like, yes. I wonder what the mindset would be.
Yes. And I don't blame them necessarily, but it sort of goes against the spirit of what you think ROH is. Like on a big show like this, that they're all just going to go for it and try to top each other. But yeah, I mean, that was the mindset. And, I'm not going to ever like criticize wrestlers for not destroying themselves in every single match. So I'm not going to like say that they did anything wrong here. But if I'm just analyzing this match as a match, I think it definitely could have been better. I do think the last few minutes were pretty great. I elevated it from a good match to, I would call it very good. I'd say, a solid 3.5 stars is what I would give this match.
So after the match, Dave Prazak says Roderick Strong has won chapter 1 of this feud, but you better believe it's far from over. Faction warfare is heating up in ROH. Roddy then puts Aries back in the stronghold post-match until Delirious comes out and chases him through the crowd. We then go backstage to join BJ Whitmer, who has a big bandage around his head, being comforted by Daisy Hayes. BJ simply says he couldn't get the job done. He couldn't get it done tonight. He walks out the back door of the building dejected. And I do think that's another interesting thing about the show is they just go heavy heels here on 2 of the major matches. Like Jacobs is the heel, and he wins the feud tonight. And likewise, Roddy – I mean, I'm sure Gabe probably thought, and I think he could get away with it because of the Dragon Gate match and how good the show is going to be. But, Roddy just beats Aries clean. Roddy turns on Aries and in their first match, he just beats him clean as a sheet. He doesn't cheat. He just wins. So
you're right. But I will say this. Yes, Jacobs is a heel. But I think they knew in Detroit the crowd was not going to feel that he was a heel. They did not at any point treat him like a heel. And I think that they knew that. I think that in the mind of the bookers, that was not a heel going over. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And we then go to the main event, which is Shima, Shingo, and Susumu Yokozuka defeating Dragon Kid, Masaki Mochizuki, and Ryo Saito in 27 minutes, 18 seconds when Yokozuka pinned Dragon Kid after rolling through a Dragon Rana. And so here we are, Matt, like 1 year after the first Dragon Gate 6-man ROH, we have another, but a few things are different. First, the most obvious one is half of the participants are new. Shima, Dragon Kid, and Ryo Saito all returned from last year, but Yokozuka, Mochizuki, and Shingo are all new to this match. They replaced Genki Horiguchi, Masato Yoshino, and Naruki Doi. This match is also the main event of the biggest show of the weekend rather than the first one the year before, which was in the mid-card of the second of 3 straight nights of big shows. It's also longer. This is almost 7 minutes longer than the Dragon Gate 6-man they did last year. What do you think about it? Like, I don't even know if it's a fair question to ask because it's hard for me to remember matches, but like, this is obviously the question everyone was asking as soon as this match was over, which is, what do you think about the match, but also how do you think it compares to the famous Dragon Gate one that you really can't quite repeat the year before?
Yeah, well, first of all, this one really was a year to the day after the last one. Unlike what Cabana said, like right there, his match was the first. This really was on the 31st. So this is 1 year to the day after the original Dragon Gate 6-man. And I think, just going in, you knew it was impossible to create the magic of the first one again because it was the first one, because it was so revelatory to a lot of the people that were watching it. So the crowd reactions were just something beyond and something special. I think people were just, people who just hadn't watched Dragon Gate, they were just amazed. And now we'd sort of started to see that style become a little more normalized in ROH. So they were never going to be able to reach that level of amazement, I think, from the audience. That being said, I do think that even besides that, I do think this match was not quite as good as the first one. I think because it was longer, there was a little more downtime. It wasn't quite as smooth. Um, but of course, it was great. Like, I mean, these guys are great, and they do what they do. They're doing what they're doing best. I think what this match was able to add that the first match didn't have was the the dynamic of Shingo being the power wrestler, kind of bullying Dragon Kid, and a little bit more of that just in general bullying Dragon Kid around. Um, and little bit longer heat sequences. First against Shima, they worked over his back and his leg for a while. Then against Dragon Kid, and like I said, just kind of like the bullying and Shingo kind of like laughing as Dragon Kid tried to strike him. And you also had the new element of Mochizuki, who has the kicks, and he would just go wild with kicks and do all sorts of crazy stuff there. The funny part is, Yokozuka is the guy who gets the big win at the end. And while he was good in this match, I don't think he really like stood out or was given a chance to really stand out in any particular way. I think that Mochizuki did stand out. I think he added some grit to the match, and I think this match was about more like hard hitting besides just the big aerial spots and things like that. So I think there were definitely things this match did better than the first one. But in the early going, as in the longer build-up sequence, there was a surprising amount of like basic moves, axe handles, full Nelsons, basic like single crabs, stomps. Not saying that's bad. Like, I think it's cool actually, but the match did progress a little bit more slowly. When they finally did get to the hot like nonstop sequence, it just wasn't quite as completely flawless as the first one. Not that there were any like botches or anything like that. It just the first one just had an element of smoothness that was just beyond anything that you'd seen in America before. And I wouldn't say this one hit that level, but still awesome, still really exciting, still spectacular, just not an all-time classic. Once again, there was just too much stuff for me to go through all of the big spots. There was a cool spot where Saito hits Shingo with his belly to belly, then Dragon Kid immediately hit Yokozuka with the deja vu with the spinning head scissors where he goes around and around and around. There was a spot where after Dragon Kid gets a hot tag after he Ranas Shima after Shima goes for a power bomb, and Mochizuki gets tagged in, who just goes completely wild with kicks and submissions and throws. There's a spot where they go for the big super Rana that they did the night before on Yokozuka, but Shima interrupts and Shingo puts Dragon Kid on his shoulders, and Yokozuka hits a doomsday device, and Shima immediately follows with a coast-to-coast dropkick on Saito, who was already on the top rope. Stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, there's just two. I mean, I'm not just going to go through a bunch of moves. There's just, a real lot. That's, you guys know it's Dragon Gate. But it's, it was a great match. I would say just not an all-time classic.
Yeah, the first thing I would say about this match is I do think you could have trimmed a couple minutes at least from the body of this match. I don't know if it needed. I agree, definitely. Yeah, I don't know if it needed to be 27 minutes long, but at the same time, I will say with the exception of maybe a couple stretches, I felt like they did a good job of doing a big flash exchange every so often before they hit the stretch run. But I do agree with you that, there was a little more downtime in the body of the match. I noticed that too. The stretch run is another difference. I think I actually timed it. I looked up in my old review. I think last year's Dragon Gate 6-man, it was maybe like the last 7 minutes where they just went nuts with everyone doing stuff, big move after big move after big move. I think in this match, it's more like 11 or 12 minutes. So it is a bigger match. The whole thing is longer. The finishing run is longer. Do I think it's better? My answer is I don't think so. I might like it a little bit more than you. I think it's great, although I think we're pretty similar on how we felt. But I think it's more than just the match quality. I just feel like part of what made last year's match special was that for a lot of people, including people that were in the crowd for those matches, that match, that first Dragon Gate 6-man in America, was a discovery. Like, you were hearing the sounds of people having their minds blown when you listen to the crowd in that match.
Revelatory is the word that I used. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great word. Not just because I like Revels, the ice cream treat, which I don't know if you guys even have in America.
Not that I'm aware of.
It's basically vanilla ice cream covered with chocolate on a stick. But
Really, I've never heard of such a thing.
So, but yeah, that match was about people, the fun of not just the match, but of seeing everyone having their minds and that crowd blown. That match was Gabe Sapolsky was calling his cousin Chuck Sapolsky and saying, "Hey, you know that new sound you were looking for? Well, listen to this." Like that was that match.
I was wondering where you were going there.
and you can't recreate that, right? Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like this match, I think you and I agree. It's like a half notch worse at least than the first match, but still great. But like, let's say this match was even a tiny bit better technically than the first match. I still think it would have lost something because you can't recreate that magic. Like there's always magic in your first time, unless it's sex, in which case there's a horror and tragedy in your first time. But the first time you see something in wrestling that's new to you, I feel like there's always that element of discovery, that revelatory, as my better half of podcasting would say, that element of surprise. And you can never get that. Like this match, like the fans go wild for this match. Don't get me wrong. Certainly by the end, it just doesn't quite have that same energy. It's the difference between people discovering that something is possible, and this year it's people expecting to see it again. And there's just a different energy to that. There's obviously a lot of fun to be had here, though, considering with all that said. I did miss the three guys they pulled out, especially Yoshino and Doi. I'm a big fan of Doi's work in ROH, although I agree with you kind of earlier that I thought like this was probably Doi's least impressive performance tonight, just more of him in the background. But his other matches he's looked great. I love Yoshino's speed, but I thought the guys they replaced them with, Mochizuki and Shingo at least, really stood out because they added a lot of variety to this match. Mochizuki's kicks really stand out always, but like they pop even more in a match like this where you're not expecting them and no one else is doing it. You said it added some grit. I thought it was a really fun element to add to a crazy spot fest six-man like this. And I thought Shingo playing the surly power guy really added some diversity to this match too. He got to do things that were kind of a flavor no one else in the match was doing. Shima and Dragon Kid were the beloved stars from the first match. Saito, who was also returning along with Yokozuka, I felt like they held up their end of the match fine. It's just that they didn't have that distinctive thing that made them stand out, that kind of identity that they really got to show off in this match, or had that like pre-existing love. Although Saito was in the first match, and I think he got a mild chant once or twice early on, so some fans did remember him. Like you said, too many big spots to mention. I could have used a bit more Dragon Kid, but I almost felt like while they gave you a decent amount of him, they really picked their spots with him to present him in the best light and leave you wanting more from him. For the second year in a row, the commentary leaves the match for the final minutes saying the action speaks for itself. I'm on the record saying I don't love that, but I've had that rant before, and I know a bunch of people do like that. So, whatever. It is what it is. The other thing I do want to talk about, though, is it's an interesting thing ROH does here that I don't think every promotion would do, which is this show, and this was known in advance due to it being on WrestleMania weekend, was going to be ROH's one of their biggest shows of the year in terms of attendance, in terms of national attention, and presumably in terms of DVD sales. And so the main event, for the main event of the show, they put on a match that is basically an offer match from another promotion. One that, other than Shingo, who's only going to be there for I think like another show or two or another month, doesn't contain a single ROH wrestler nor any wrestler that's.
Well, that's another reason why I asked if you thought that the cage match should have been the main event.
Yeah, it is an interesting point. It doesn't contain any wrestler that's going to be more than a very rare special guest star going forward. I have no problem with that. I think they earned it. And in fact, they kind of tell the true story of this match on a commentary where they talk about how, like, hey, the first Dragon Gate six-man last year, it was on the middle of the card, and now it stole the show. And so 1 year later, they've earned, the main event of the biggest show. And I also think there probably wasn't any match that could have followed. I do think the cage match probably could have, but even if I was Jacob and Whitmer, I wouldn't have wanted to follow. I wouldn't have wanted to see. I would have been happy with my third from the top and not having to follow this. But I think there would have been a lot of wrestling promoters in history who have been too self-conscious or paranoid or whatever you want to say on a show this big and said, look, we can't have another company main eventing on our show, on a show of this size. And ROH, I think to their credit, didn't have that problem. I think that's one cool aspect of ROH where maybe something they picked up from ECW a little bit, where you remember they had the Michinoku Pro tag on their first pay-per-view, and even though that match did not main event, it was like one of the show stealer of the show, and it didn't have any ECW involvement wedged in it. It was just like, we're going to highlight another promotion. We're going to give you a taste of them, and we're not going to try and force our chocolate into their peanut butter on this night. We're just going to let them be them, and we're going to benefit just by saying, hey, look, we have this really cool thing that no one else in America is having right now, although I guess PWG would have some of the Dragon Gate guys. But at the same time, yeah, I can see the logic of some old crusty promoters saying you should end with – and I agree with you. They could have ended this show with Whitmer and Jacobs and gotten away with it, but I also kind of like that they ended it with the Dragon Gate guys. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think both would have been fine, honestly. Like, I do think that the cage match was the match of the night. And like I said, I think, at least to this point, the match of the year. And I think it had the biggest emotional impact. So that's why I think that it might have been a better choice for main event. But, like, I mean, I don't think this was a mistake or anything like that. I think that you're right. They totally earned it. And the crowd totally accepted it, and it's great. Like, I certainly, it's nothing that I think was like an error, just sort of like a little bit of, I don't know, revising of history and just kind of a little bit of fantasy booking that I was curious about. But certainly, I think either could have worked. And I don't think that Jacobs and Whitmer would have suffered from having to follow this.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. So then we go to the Observer. Dave wrote, we had mixed responses, with about half saying this match was better than last year's match of the year, and half saying it was close to but not quite as good. They went longer and tore down the house. It was a different kind of match and went 27-18 before Yokozuka rolled through on a Dragon Rana by Dragon Kid to get the pin. Lots of people rated it 5 stars, and nobody gave me a report lower than 4.5 stars, so it must have been awesome. And then PW Torch, they kind of echo the same thoughts, where they wrote, some fans wrote into the Torch. Some fans that attended this event called it better than last year's Dragon Gate 6-man tag match featuring Blood Generation versus Do Fixer that won PW Torch Match of the Year. Others have said it wasn't as good, but still excellent. Sapolsky says he'll let fans judge for themselves which was better. Quote, I thought it was absolutely sensational, he says. Which one was better? I'll let all the people judge that for themselves. It was a fantastic match, and I'm sure it will get major Match of the Year consideration like last year's 6-man. So yeah, it seems like that was the general consensus. The people was like, I will say this: I feel like the second is not remembered the way the first is. So if we just go on by like what history says, I think people remember the second being really good. Yeah, but everyone remembers the impact of the first one. But
I definitely don't think it got like particularly major Match of the Year consideration. Maybe it finished in the Observer top 10. I don't even remember if it did or not. But nobody expected it to have a chance to like win the award that year.
I think the thing this match did do was it established the tradition, right, where they would do the Dragon Gate 6-man again the year later, and then when Gabe split away from ROH, he would still try and do matches like this on WrestleMania weekend. So it kind of established that tradition of a big foreign talent, amazing 6-man. And I feel like if this 6-man hadn't been close to the quality of the first one, they'd probably just leave it with a 2 and done. But it did kind of start the ball rolling of, this is something we should do every year at WrestleMania. But
for sure, you could always rely on the Dragon Gate crew to give you a great trios match.
So immediately after the match, the camera gets a shot of the crowd giving an incredibly loud standing ovation. The crowd chants, "Thank you, Dragon Gate, please come back," and ROH. All the wrestlers shake hands and then raise each other's hands. And then we finally joined Rebecca Bayless backstage, who says that was an amazing main event, and Dragon Gate never fails to impress. Bayless goes looking for wrestlers to give their opinions on the match, and she finds Jimmy Jacobs and Lacey both sitting on the floor nearby, selling their beatings from the cage match. Bayless says she can take them to the hospital, but they just ignore her, with Lacey nuzzling into Jimmy's chest and him wrapping an arm around her. So
yeah, I mean that's the big moment that Lacey kind of like goes to Jimmy for like comfort and physical comfort. Like, that's like a big breakthrough for Jimmy Jacobs and Lacey.
Yeah, it's a lot more organic. It's not her like, oh, I'm going to give you a hug as like a big performative thing. It's a very natural, just like, yeah,
Right.
I just need you right now.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Matt, who wins the Matt F. Trophy? Is it Rhett Titus for his great table setting up skills?
Should have been, but no. I'm gonna give it to Jimmy Jacobs. It's I think like again maybe his crowning moment, um, in his hometown, big win, incredible match, um, absolutely memorable. I think the fruits of his labors were born here. So I think it's a big moment for him, he definitely deserves a trophy for that moment.
Yeah. And that's a great pick. And I agree. And I'll say this, Whitmer, even before the assault stuff, and Jacobs, they have a lot of detractors online. And even I'll say this: if we had to do just quarter of the year awards, which we're not, we only do at year end awards. We're not that crazy. But if we had to, because we were just at the end of the show, we'd be through the first quarter of 2007 for Ring of Honor. If we had to do quarter of the year awards, Jimmy and BJ would both be in serious consideration to finish in my top 3 for wrestler of the quarter year. Like, their matches against each other, really, the Falls Count Anywhere and this, great. Jimmy had that great match with Colt. BJ had that really surprisingly good tables. Yeah. And like these guys were really great. I mean, maybe this kind of stuff isn't for everybody, but like I'm reminded, I think when I was watching that bit of the BJ Shoot interview, one other thing he says is the thing he felt he excelled at is like big story-based feuds that end in really like physically demanding gimmick matches. And I think you see that here. I think Jimmy Jacobs was also great at that. And you see kind of their best versions of themselves in this feud.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Whitmer, even before all the allegations came out, when we talked about the War of the Wire with Necro. But yeah, I mean, I always thought he was underrated as a wrestler, and yeah, there are things that he's like kind of one of the best at, and yeah, it's stuff like you're right, it's stuff like this, like big climactic, violent blow-off matches. Like yeah, he really is great at those, and this was another example for sure.
And unfortunately for him, he doesn't really get put another one of those. He gets put in the Hangman 3, which we will cover, and I don't think that's really conducive to the kind of things he's going to be good at, but. So before we get our thoughts on the show, we have one last quote from Gabe Sapolsky. He talked to the PW Torch. This comes from the Torch. They wrote, ROH Booker Gabe Sapolsky thought both shows went very well outside of the injury to Mark Briscoe. Quote, I was very happy with both shows, says Sapolsky. The only bad thing was, of course, Mark Briscoe's injury. It was a real downer, but he's okay now, so it's all good. I thought everything else went great, and all the guys up and down our roster pulled together as a team and put on the best shows that they could. I feel that these were the kind of shows that make new fans. So, Matt, what do you think about the show? And it's kind of interesting to think this is probably like the most success ROH will ever have from one standpoint during the time we cover the Gabe Sapolsky era, because if you think about it, I think they drew like roughly 1,300 fans each to each of the UK shows, and then they come here and they do 1,200 fans roughly each for the WrestleMania weekend shows. They do 5,000 fans over 4 straight shows. I don't think they ever will have another attendance streak like this in the Sapolsky era.
Yeah, maybe not. I guess we'll have to see how the WrestleMania shows do the following year, but you're probably right. It's funny because like last year's WrestleMania weekend shows were so great. I do think that compared to my memory, this show was probably on the disappointing side, honestly. Like, I think that the first half of the show, there wasn't a ton for me to sink my teeth into. There was some pretty good stuff. It did end with 2 absolutely spectacular matches and a good match in the middle. So, I can't say this wasn't a very good show. But there was a lot of stuff that bugged me on the undercard. The Jonny Fairplay stuff was, I don't know, I just think cornball. I thought that the stuff with Homicide, it just wasn't my thing. So it wasn't as much of an A show as maybe I remembered. Again, there was no ROH title match, there was no tag team title match. The only really like big moment on the show in terms of like kind of ramifications for the future, whereas I guess just the Jacobs versus Whitmer blow off. So yeah, so I don't know. I don't think this is like an all-time great ROH show. I do think it has an all-time great ROH crowd and two really, really top tier matches. So it is very good. But I think I will leave it at it was very good and not one of the best.
I think I like the show a bit more than you. The two big matches deliver the way you want, the Dragon Gate and the cage match. I thought there were a bunch of like 3.5-star tags that were good on this show, 3 to 3.5-star tags. And, that's an enjoyable way to fill an undercard. I agree with you that there were some disappointments. The Aries strong match was not as good as you probably most of us would be hoping for. And the fair play thing didn't quite feel like Ring of Honor, and it kind of resulted in a Chris Hero Nigel match that was not close to as good as you think those two could have against each other. But I will say this, even those two disappointments I thought were still entertaining. Like I think we both agree Roddy Aries was still a very good match. And I don't know about you, but even I was still entertained by the fair play segment, even while recognizing that it is kind of just a weird oddity for Ring of Honor.
And that's what we hope we are on this podcast, right? Entertaining disappointments.
Yeah, and weird oddities, of course. Yeah, exactly. We're bringing back that stable.
Some people don't like these oddities.
But
speaking of ICP.
It's interesting shows that they put on here, and it's cool. You know what? All right, this is what I like about it. This show's called Supercard of Honor 2, and I think some shows, and especially Ring of Honor, they went too far in doing the named, numbered annual shows where, like, Death Before Dishonor 7, Part 3. Like, I think you have to you can't, if you do that too much, it gets a little weird. I prefer the year naming convention sometimes. Like, not everything's WrestleMania, guys, but this really did feel like Supercard of Honor 2 in a sense that it felt like a sequel to last year's WrestleMania weekend. Like, I know the Dragon Gate thing didn't happen on the same show, but we talked about during this episode, the story of the show is two mid-card matches last year that way over-delivered, Jimmy Jacobs and BJ Whitmer and the Dragon Gate match. They get to come back 1 year later, WrestleMania weekend, and they get to be the stars of the show and put in position that way. And so it is kind of like it's the rare show labeled 2 that kind of feels like a movie sequel to the last show, to the shows that followed. So I kind of like that as like a weird wrestling nerdy thing. But
that's cool. And that's cool. And as far as naming conventions, just makes me think about and lament the idea. Most wrestling companies have dropped both of those. They don't do numbers or years anymore. I don't know why. It bothers me. I want to get back like Revolution 25, not just Revolution. Like bring back numbers one way or the other, whether it's the year or the number. Like I don't even know. I mean, for a while they stopped even doing it with WrestleMania. I think they did say WrestleMania 40 last year. I don't know if they're talking about 41 this year. I'm not sure. But I miss years and numbers from the titles of my wrestling events.
Yeah, and I hate that too because I feel like when you get a show that a pay-per-view that's that long running, like it becomes a selling point, right? Like,
yes,
we've done so many of these, it's got to be good,
Yes.
Whether that's true or not. And I feel like just to throw that away to the point where, sometimes some fans were calling different years like, oh, this was WrestleMania play button because they were searching for like an identifier, like some kind of logo thing that they could point to. It's like, just give us the goddamn Roman numerals. People know Roman numerals. The Super Bowl uses Roman numerals. Like,
yeah.
It's insane.
It makes it feel more epic.
Yeah. But that's an odd late show rant. But that brings us to plugs. Me too. Through the years at gmail.com, THROH for through. If you ever want to write us an email, at Trevor Dame on Twitter and at Mayor MGF on Twitter. We're also on Blue Sky. We're using the similar usernames. Just type into the convention, whatever, search for us. Next time on the show, Matt, we've just covered 8 straight big shows. And I love when we cover the big shows, but I've always also said I love covering the smaller shows that a lot of podcasts probably won't cover. We're like the old Chris Rock thing. When they say when you love someone, you got to love every part of them. You got to love the crust of a person. We love the crust of Ring of Honor, and we are definitely going to be covering the crust because we're covering a B show. Next time we will be covering This Means War 2. Speaking of shows that did not deserve a sequel. Matt, this is how much of a B show this show is. I've disclosed this before. I sold my Ring of Honor collection, most of it. I have a few DVDs before we ever started the show. And just to make things easier, we use we have sailed the pirate seas. We use some torrented video files to watch these shows just to make it easier and to make sure we get the complete shows as opposed to like the Honor Club edited shows.
I paid for all of these shows originally too. All of them. Every single fucking one of them I paid for. So get off my ass.
So, if someone wants to come after us, I spent a depressing amount of my youth income on Ring of Honor. Matt did too. Matt attended these shows, so like you've gotten more than you deserve from us. So
yeah, every show that I went to back then, I also bought on DVD.
This is like someone yelling at someone for like playing a ROM of Super Mario Brothers 3 when they bought the game 3 times or something over the course of their life. Like, you can't get mad at us. But anyway, I will say this, Matt. To show you how much of a B show this is, in like the most popular torrent file for the Ring of Honor collection, this is one of the only shows that's missing. I had to go through other means to find this show. That's how much of a B show this is.
I can't even imagine how you found it.
I mean, someone else had it, but it was a very small torrent. But like, just fun to see a pack of like, here's every show, and then This Means War 2 isn't there. It's just like, well, not this one. For some reason, no one bought this one. But we will cover it, and it's got some interesting stuff. Doug Williams returns, everyone's favorite special guest star of Ring of Honor, to tag in the main event with Nigel McGuinness against Chris Hero and Takeshi Morishima. We get the first ever full Faction Warfare 6-man tag, and we also get the debuts as full-timers El Generico and Kevin Steen. So they're going to be back, and they won't be leaving us this time, Matt. They'll be here for the rest of the podcast run. So
yes, and like you said, Morishima is back, and he's not leaving for a long time either. So nice beginning for a new era, I would say.
And the start of the Colt Cabana farewell tour. So there'll be plenty of stuff to talk about, and we'll cover it then. So until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.